And I want to remember on whenever we met last Thursday, I guess it was, and Wednesday evening, I had received some information about oral dual agency, and I didn't want to talk about oral dual agency until I got the right information for you guys. So I do want to start with that. I've updated my PowerPoints in LearnTest Pass. So if you have PowerPoints from before, like yesterday for Unit 7, you do have a change in your slide, and we're going to look at what they say and what this information is. All right, you guys, let's remind me in a chat before you start writing. Let's all remind me in a chat. If I have an oral agency relationship, who do I have that relationship with? If I have an oral agency relationship, who do I have that relationship with? An oral agency relationship. Good morning. I have an oral agency relationship. The rules allow me, and I'm going to go back for 1 minute because again, I got some conflicting information. So we're gonna go back just so I don't do this, but I am allowed to work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. You guys already have this, you don't have to write it down. So who can I work with under an oral agency relationship? I can work with the buyer at first. The rules say I have to put it in writing before I present the offer. I cannot perform a single service for the seller without putting that agency relationship in writing. I cannot do a single thing for the seller without having a written agency agreement. So this rule about oral agency only applies to buyers. Do I have everybody so far? Remember what we said, buyers are like these scared, timid little creatures, right? They run away of fear easily. So if we can have an oral relationship at first, this is an agency agreement. I owe them old car. It's express, which means the terms have been spelled out. So I've had a conversation with them, but I can work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first. The seller must be in writing. What the rules of oral dual agency say, if you have a buyer that has agreed or not agreed to dual agency orally, and they later change their mind, they can change their mind orally because we never had it in writing to begin with. So let's say you have this conversation with your buyer, an oral buyer agency that is an express agreement. So you have to discuss all the terms. You have to have a conversation about all the terms, even though it's not in writing, you still have a discussion about it. And you talk about dual agency. And that buyer says, no, I'm not doing that. I don't like the sound of that. I have an oral no to dual agency, right? They have orally told me no, that they don't agree to dual agency. So we're out looking at properties. Fast forward, I don't know, 3 months. We're still out looking at properties. We haven't found the one yet. And all of a sudden, my firm lists a property that my buyer says, ooh, I like that. Can we go see it? Can I show it to them with an oral no to dual agency? Can I show it to them with an oral no? And I'm seeing head shake no, and I agree. They've already said no to dual. And so now they want to see this property. I can't show it to them unless I go back and revisit dual agency, have a conversation with them again. And if they change their mind orally, now I can show them the property. I got to get a yes to dual to get them in the front door, both parties. Okay. For the sellers, because their consent is in writing or non-consent is in writing from the get-go, the only way to change is in writing. And this second bullet point is what caused all the ruckus last week. This second bullet point was what caused me to say, I don't want to talk about this. The second bullet point, you're going to find conflicting information about this in your book. I need everybody to make sure you have that second bullet point written down, highlighted, starred, and I'm going to try to point out some of the places that you can see this conflicting information in your book. Your book says, if the seller says no in writing and the buyer says yes orally, both parties can change their mind orally because the buyer's oral. That's what your book teaches you. And I learned last week that your book was wrong. The only way to change the seller's consent that's already in writing is in writing. So let's walk through another scenario. I have a listing agreement with the seller. It's in writing because we cannot do anything for the owner or the seller. So it's in writing where they say no to dual agency. This house sits on the market for sale for 3-4 months. Not much interest, not much activity. And all of a sudden I have a buyer from my firm that's interested in seeing that listing. The buyer has said yes in oral. Yes, excuse me, to dual agency orally. But the seller has said no in writing. Where it stands right now, can I allow this showing? No, because my seller has already said no. Everybody with me? My seller said, no, I don't want any of your firm's buyer clients to view my property. So how can I make this happen? After 3-4 months, might the seller be more apt to change their mind if they haven't had much interest and they haven't had much, I mean, it depends, right? We don't know because we don't know the seller and their situation. Does it hurt me to revisit it? Like, look, we've been on the market for 4 months and now I got a buyer client in my firm that's interested. What's the worst they can say? The worst they can say is, no, I told you no, don't ask me again, right? But things might have changed from 4 months ago. So now they say, oh my gosh, I just got to sell this house, whatever, bring anybody in, I don't care. Before that buyer can come in, we have to go to our listing agreement, strike out the no, have everybody date and initial, and change that to yes in writing because it started in writing. Contract law says the only way to change something in writing is in writing. Question comes in, why would a seller say no to dual agency? Because they don't want me to split my interest. Remember what dual agency is, my advocacy goes away and I'm being split down the middle between them and the buyer. And the seller says, I want you all to myself. Okay. So everybody have this? This is the revised slide. If you will, look with me real quick on page 162 in your book. What this affects in your book, now that I know what I know, what this affects in your book is situation number 2. You guys see that? 162, situation number 2. I would just cross that out. I don't want you guys to confuse yourselves. So I would just cross it out. If you do choose to look at it, know that if the seller changes their mind, they have to do so in writing. They got to strike through, make the change, and all parties initial and date. That's how you change any contract. Yes. You are always going to be tested on the new information. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. You're always going to be tested on the current information. The other place, if you will flip ahead to page 176. Question number 2 on page 176. I'm recording, so I may need you guys to go back, just make a note. So on page 176, number 2, this new procedure affects number 2. And then on page 188, a question comes in about dual agency and a customer. Is dual agency about the customer? How many clients do I have with dual? I have 2. I feel like we need to go back and revisit dual agency from last week. Y'all please make a note to do that. Page 188, the next to last paragraph. It says, under the North Carolina Real Estate Commission rules, an oral agency agreement with a property owner, da, 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 And then it says there is only one exception to this rule. Everybody see that? Cross that out. There's only one exception to this rule. Again, you guys, and I'm getting ready to sum this up for you. So as soon as you're done, we're gonna, because it's important that we cover this and then, of course, move on. To simplify, the only way you can make a change to a written agreement is in writing. The only way you can make a change to a written agreement is in writing. And this new procedure, it's the other way they had it, that your book that we just edited your book, that was confusing as all get out. Because those of you that have a basis of contract law think, why are we changing contract writing to oral? It makes more sense. It's more aligned with contract law. The only way you can change a contract that's in writing is by changing it in writing. Okay, we good? How do you change something that's in writing? In writing. Okay. The other thing, really quick. So where all this came from was this year's CE topic. And we'll talk about CE when we get to license law and commission rule. Please don't worry about continuing education right now. But this year's CE topics I found very interesting. Y'all want to know what this year's CE topics are? They just dropped them in like July. So that's why they're brand new information. The two big topics this year in CE is for agents that are already licensed. Anybody that wants to maintain a license has got to take CE. The two main topics this year are material facts and dual agency. See, a lot of times what we see in continuing education, we're revisiting topics from pre-licensing. We're revisiting topics from post-licensing. And once the Real Estate Commission gets a whole bunch of calls, remember last week when we looked at the disciplinary action and we saw how material facts were mishandled case after case after case? You guys remember that? So it stands to reason that agents across the state need a refresher on material facts. There's a lot of complaints about agency. We're going to have it again in CE. So the commission, you know, they pay attention to those complaints. They're just not out to get us. They're just not out to discipline us, but they pay attention and they say, wow, the majority of these this year were about material facts. So I think every single agent across the state of North Carolina needs a refresher on material facts. So this year's CE topic. So what I did, because I thought about giving you guys the whole thing, but that's a lot of information. But instead, what I found, and I've put this in Learn, Test, Pass, they gave us at the end of CE a summary of important points. So I have this in Learn, Test, Pass for you guys as an additional resource, an additional layer to help you better wrap your brain around material facts. So that's in the Unit 7. And also in the Unit 7 is the summary of the agency discussion. So yet here's two more tools to help you guys wrap your brains around this. Guys, I get it. It's a lot of information. I get it. You feel like you're drinking from a fire hydrant? Does that sound about right? Hopefully you guys are able to keep up. You know, starting next week, things go a little quicker. So hopefully you guys are able to get caught up, stay caught up, and use these tools, these resources as just another way to help you wrap your brain around it. Okay. The other thing in Learn, Test, Pass I want to show you that I forgot to last week. This is just a sample oral buyer agency letter. Remember, buyer agencies oral, it's, you know, express, which means the terms are clearly stated. But this letter, this could give you an idea of a letter that you possibly could send your oral buyer. Because what do we document? Everything. So if I have an oral conversation with you one-on-one, maybe over the phone or in person, how do I document that conversation? I go home and follow it up with an email, don't I? Or I go home and follow it up with a sample oral buyer agency letter. This isn't creating agency. This is expressly telling the buyer what our oral buyer agency agreement means, what I should have told them orally when we first met. The buyer doesn't sign this. They don't want to sign anything just yet, do they? That's why we're under an oral buyer agency agreement. So I just put this in here for you guys just to, you know, again, another way to help you wrap your brains around this information. You can look at it. You don't have to. It's entirely up to you. Anything in Learn, Test, Pass is here meant to help you further understand. The only way to change something in writing that's already in writing is by changing it in writing. Y'all have that written down 20 times? Okay. All right. So I did my homework for the weekend. Check. Did you guys do yours? Do you guys look ahead at Unit 8, where we're going to go in Unit 8? So we left on Thursday talking about meeting with sellers and some various things that we can do pre-listing. We're trying to learn. I need to answer that on the break, please. We're trying to learn as much about the home as possible. Remember, we talked about 2 agents going on a competitive listing appointment, and one knew about zoning and schools and highway and the other one didn't. Which one looks better to the seller? We all agreed, I think, the one that did their homework, the one that took the time to learn about the property. So the broker, you need, and when you get to your firms, of course, they're going to help you with these sites. That's what they're there for. They're going to help point you in the right direction. But the broker needs to learn as much about the home as possible. Guys, ideally, by the time the broker gets there for their listing appointment, the only thing they don't know is what the inside looks like. I can get an idea for what the inside looked like when they bought the house, but I don't know what changes they've made. Do I? I don't know if they painted or knocked down a wall or put a wall up or new carpet or what. And when we're getting ready, this pre-listing idea, there's information that both of us can gather. The broker is getting like zoning, school boards, any of that public information, tax records, any of that public information. The seller can start getting me, for example, HOA documents if they're in an HOA. I know a good buyer's agent's going to ask for them, right? So why would I not have that ready? Some homeowners will only talk to the owner. Some will talk to anybody, but some homeowners associations will only talk to the owner. So we very well may need the seller to help us because that's who they're going to talk to, help us get those covenants and bylaws. The other big thing that we can get from the seller is their outstanding liens. What are your unpaid mortgages? Are you delinquent on taxes? When we see our listing agreement in just a second, we're going to see that I have a place in the listing agreement for the seller to spell out their debt. It's approximate balance. This is awkward, isn't it? I probably just met you an hour or 2 ago and I'm already saying, how much do you owe on this property? But guys, we got to find this stuff out up front. What if your your seller is underwater? Do y'all know what that means? If they're underwater, they owe more than what they can sell the home for. So if their outstanding balances, so I got 3 mortgages and 2 judgments and delinquent taxes, if all of those outstanding balances start adding up, before you list the property, you may want to have a conversation like, can you afford to bring money to closing? Because sellers that are underwater have to bring money from closing. They're not getting money. Aren't these important? Wouldn't you rather find this out before you list the property than at the closing table that they can't afford to close? So I know it's awkward. Hey, I've been there. Like I said, sometimes you just meet the seller 2 hours ago and you're going, well, what's your debt? But it's important that we find out if they're underwater and they owe money, are they going to be able to pay your commission? Aren't these important questions that you want to find out? So having the seller get their approximate balances early on helps me decide if they can afford to sell. I know you guys weren't around in the housing market crash of 2009, 2010, 2011, something when there. That's what would happen. Sellers got underwater, owners got underwater, and they didn't have any money to bring to closing. So foreclosures and short sales were their options. I'm going to talk about foreclosures and short sales when we get to units 14 and 15. So we need to have these conversations up front. Bring me your HOA docs, and then bring me your outstanding liens. It says to find out if the seller is willing to do seller financing or buyer assuming the seller's mortgage. I'm going to talk about those in units 14 and 15. Is that a solution for, could be a solution for any seller, not necessarily underwater, but possibly if they agree to it and the lender agrees to it. Again, we'll talk about both of those in units 14 and 15. So your pre-listing meeting, one of the first things you do with the seller is you're working with real estate agent disclosure. The reason I have an asterisk there, the book coaches us to do our disclosure as soon as we get to the home for the listing appointment. The reason I have that asterisk there though, what if first substantial contact happened 3 days ago when we were on the phone scheduling the appointment? Do I wait 3 days and do my disclosure when I get there? No, if first substantial contact happened on the phone 3 days ago, then I need to do it 3 days ago, at least verbally, right? Oh, you said something, let me stop you. You guys with me? Now, assuming they just call me and say, we want you to come by and talk to us about listing our home. Can you come by Wednesday at 2? And I say, Wednesday at 2 is great. I'll see you then. We didn't really hit first substantial contact, did we? So when your book says you do that as soon as you go walk in the front door, that's assuming you haven't already done it because you didn't already have a need to do it. So you go to the seller's house. Let's pretend that first substantial contact hasn't happened. You go to the seller's house for your listing appointment Wednesday at 2. The seller's proud. Y'all, this is their home. This is their home. To the seller, this is a home. To everybody else in the world, it's just a house. But to the seller, this is their home. They're proud. They have memories, blood, sweat, and tears went into this place. And they're proud. And one of the first things they want to do is give you the grand tour. They're so excited to see you. They just want to show off. They're like, come here, look at what we got. We need to keep this in control. Before we start going around and looking at stuff and allowing the seller to point out problems that could later turn to be a material fact, we need to sit down at the kitchen table or the dining room table or the living room, I don't care. Sit down somewhere and have a conversation with the seller about the working with real estate agent disclosure. Let them know now that while they don't have to disclose material facts, you do. Might that change their tone when they're walking through the home? If they didn't know that, they'd be more apt to walk around going, well, that's broke and that hadn't worked in 15 years and da-da-da-da-da, right? But once you explain, we've got to tell them this up front. Don't position them to put themselves in a position that they're not happy with. We got to be up front with them. So tell them, I have to disclose material facts about the property. The big thing that we're doing before we have any kind of tours or conversation with the sellers, they need to understand that I don't owe them confidentiality until they decide to hire me. What if this is a competitive listing appointment? You guys remember we talked about competitive listing appointments last week. Competitive listing appointment, the seller might be talking to 3 different agents. And if they're talking to 3 different agents, they can only hire 1, right? So that means there's 2 people out there that didn't get the job. I hope it's you. I hope you get it, but you got a third of a chance of somebody else getting it. The seller needs to know, if you don't hire me, I don't owe you confidentiality. So take that into consideration when we're walking through your home and you're giving me the grand tour. A lot of times the listing appointment turns into 2. You go the first time to do your dog and pony show where you sell yourself, and then they call you and they say, we want to hire you. We chose you. And you say, great. When can I come, measure and take pictures and get the information I need to put your listing in? You guys with me? So sometimes these listing appointments turn into 2 or more stages. So question comes in, do I wait until they start releasing information about buying or selling before I disclose? No. Or if you assume, I don't assume it, I hate that word. Or if you assume they want to, do you just go ahead and disclose? I disclose when I walk in the door. So I walk in the door and they say, hey, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate your time. And I say, wow, thank you guys for calling me. This is really nice. And they say, do you want the grand tour? And I say, before we do that, can we sit down and have a chat, please? And I can whip out my working with real estate agent disclosure. I got a Q&A brochure, right, that I'm going to provide them, right? We have this stuff up front. Once we get through that, then we can go get the grand tour and they can. Same thing with buyer consultation. Yes. Buyer comes in the office, they're going to meet with you for an hour in the office. What's the first thing you should do? Working with real estate agent, because it's safe to say it's somewhere in that hour, we're going to hit first substantial contact. So you don't have to wait. You don't have to be in the throes of showing property when the buyer, oh my God, we got to start. If you know it's going to come, like a listing appointment or a buyer consultation, do it first and get it out of the way. Trina, I'll be happy to answer that in a bit on break. So now you got the listing. Now you got the listing. So now we got to get it ready to get it in MLS. So you need to inspect the property. You and the seller should go around the property and look at it together. MLS has a listing sheet. I actually got a sample of that, Learn, Test, Pass for you guys that we'll see in just a second. I actually take mine with me. Man, I'm old school. Piece of paper, a clipboard, and a pencil. I'm here to tell you guys, and online's fine too, if that's your preference. Guys, I'm here to tell you, after a while, this sounds horrible, but after a while, all these homes start looking the same. And once you've seen enough of them, you can't remember what kitchen was in what house, right? What feature was in what house. I know that sounds awful, but after a while, they all start to look similar once you've seen enough. And I have my listing data sheet with me because I want to make notes as I go, instead of calling the seller after the fact saying, did y'all have ceiling fans? I don't remember if your house did or not. So that's just my preference. I take my sheet with me so I can make notes as I go. We need to ask the seller if they've had any recent renovations or repairs. Remember, we talked about the mechanics lien. Why is that important to us? Recent renovations and repairs. We talked about the mechanics lien. Did they pull permits? That's important too. Yes, we need to find out if finished space is permitted space. It's sewer. Is it on public or on site? Sometimes your seller may look at you and say, gee, I don't really know. I don't know if it's sewer or on site. You know how we can find out? Once you run back to your office and get me your utility bills. If they're on public sewer, they're going to have a charge for it in their water bill, aren't they? So how can we find out? We can help them discover that. Go over your marketing plan with them, when you plan to promote the property, how you plan to promote it. Again, your firms will help you with all that. I just encourage you to be creative and think outside the box. And then you're going to help, we need to help the seller determine square footage. I will talk about square footage in just a second. Preparing the property for listing does include pictures. Some agents take their own, some agents hire somebody. So to address that question, I have somebody on my team that does it. So do I do my own? Kind of, sort of. My team member's like an extension of me. So kind of, sort of. But you either take your own pictures or you hire somebody to do it. If y'all are taking your own pictures, will you guys make me a promise? I'm on a quest to end this. If you're taking your own pictures, before you take pictures of the bathroom, put the toilet seat down. That drives me nuts to see a listing in MLS. Just promise me you'll do that. Put it down. Again, we'll talk about square footage in just a second. We're going to look at our listing agreement in just a second. Both of our agency agreements talk about how and when we earn our commission and when we get paid. So we'll see that as well. Skipping past the agency agreement that's in your book, what you have in your book is out of date. So when you guys look at the listing agreement, I want you looking in Learn Test Pass. I will always have the current information for you in Learn Test Pass. So skipping ahead just a bit to page 204, there's a couple things in our buyer's agency agreement that discuss how we can earn a fee as a buyer's agent. Your firm's policy may allow you to collect a retainer fee. With a retainer fee, you're collecting a portion of the commission up front. If the buyer doesn't buy, you keep that retainer fee. If the buyer does buy, then that commission, that should be credited back to the commission due at closing. Again, you need to check with your firm's policy to see if they allow you to collect a retainer fee. How most buyer's agents get paid is known as a success fee, meaning we get paid when we successfully get them to closing, when we successfully do the job that we were hired to do. And that job is to help them locate and purchase a property. Trina, it just depends. Every firm is different. We are going to talk about our buyer's agency agreement in just a bit as well. Buyer's agency agreement is on 205 in your book. Again, that one is out of date. Please make sure when you look at any form, you're looking at the ones in Learn Test Pass. And then skipping ahead again to page 211, we talk about splitting of fees. Co-brokered sale means how many firms are involved. You can show me, I can see your fingers. How many firms are involved with a co-brokered sale? There are two. Firm ABC is representing the seller, firm XYZ is representing the buyer. They're competing firms, but we're coming together to brokerage the transaction. That's a co-brokered. Remember, the seller pays commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the firm that brings the buyer. And that commission is advertised in MLS. When you guys get a call from your buyer that says, I want to see 123 Main Street, the first thing you're going to do is go to MLS and look up 123 Main Street, and it'll tell you right there, if you bring me a ready, willing, and able buyer, this is how much I promise to pay you. Your promise for compensation will be in MLS. An in-house sale is how many firms? An in-house sale is how many firms? In-house, that's right, just one. ABC brings the seller, ABC brings the buyer. The listing agreement spells out how agents get paid in a dual agency situation if the seller allows delay. Y'all please remember, agency agreements are employment contracts. We got to spell out how and when we expect to get paid. Co-listing a property, you might have two firms coming together to co-list it. This used to happen a lot more like before the internet because of advertising and promotion. We still see this though. Let's say, for example, you are an agent in Burlington, and Burlington is a member of the Triad MLS. And you get a call to list a property in Cary, I don't know, somewhere east of Burlington. Because you're a member of the Triad MLS, you're not going to be able to get the listing in the Triangle MLS, right? You can only put a listing in the member where you're a member of. So the seller may want to co-list it, have two firms, one from the Triad and one from the Triangle. So to co-list it, so they can get more exposure, so they can get it in both MLSs and get advertising and marketing. How do you get paid as a co-listing agent? It just depends on the firm's policy, what the firms can agree to, and it's all spelled out in our agency agreement. The other time I've seen co-listings might be here in the Triad MLS, but let's just say, for example, a $1 million property. They may hire two firms to help them for exposure. I have no problem splitting a commission on a $1 million property. How about you guys? Percentage of $1 million? All right. You know, again, you guys, how and when you co-list with other firms could come down to your firm's policy. My license says I can only handle transactions located where? In the state of North Carolina. I cannot cross the border to do real estate unless you get a license up there, down there, around there. Continuing on page 211, we need to talk about, there's different types of listing agreements. And there's 3 different types of listing agreements that we're going to talk about. And all these types of listing agreements tend to be problem topics. With the first is called an open listing. And with an open listing, the seller hires multiple firms. It's not exclusive, non-exclusive. It's an open listing. The only one that's going to get paid is the one that brings the buyer. So you go in an open listing with, I don't know, 4 other firms, you all list it, you all do your thing. You're trying to sell it because that's how you get paid. Also with an open listing, the seller retains the right to send it on their own and not pay any of us. You guys like the sound of this? Does this sound like a good deal to you? I hope not. Here's the good news. At least in the Triad MLS, I can't speak for other MLSs, but at least in the Triad MLS, open listings are not allowed. So for those of you here in the Triad, you don't got to worry about this. Other MLSs, I don't know. I don't know what your MLS says. But basically with an open listing, the seller hires multiple agents. The only one that gets paid is the one that brings the buyer. If none of them bring the buyer, then nobody gets paid. That's an open listing. I don't know how many MLSs are in the state. Can we focus on listing agreements? So an open listing. Another type of listing agreement we have is an exclusive agency listing. With exclusive agency, how many firms are there? How many firms is the seller dating? Just one, right? Exclusivity, the seller can only date one firm. But in an exclusive agency only, the listing agent, the listing firm only gets paid if they bring the buyer. The seller still retains the right to sell it on their own. So exclusive agency, there's only one firm. That's better than an open listing. But when you list this property, you better bring the buyer if you want to get paid. That's the only way you can get paid is if you bring the buyer. These are allowed in Triad MLS, but in my 21 years, I've never seen one. They are allowed. I'm not saying they're not out there, but I've never ever seen them. Seller automatically accepts dual agency. No, they have to agree to it or not in the listing agreement. So what's the one we like and the one that we see the most often and the one that we're getting ready to view when we look at our agency agreement? The one that we like is the exclusive right to sell. How many firms did the seller hire? Just one. And guess what? I get paid whenever it closes. I don't care where the buyer comes from. Did I bring the buyer? Did another firm bring the buyer? Did the seller bring the buyer themselves? I get paid regardless. Doesn't this sound nice? Don't we like this? This is the one that I feel like we use the majority of the time. One firm, and that firm gets paid regardless. There's another type. I need to skip ahead really quick just to point it out. Please look ahead in your book on page 218. 218 talks about a net listing, about halfway downish. It talks about a net listing. Basically, what a net listing says, the seller looks at you and says, I need to make X amount from the sale of this property. And what a net listing says is anything over that amount, the agent gets to net. So if the seller says, for example, I need to make X amount, you determine they got to sell for 150. If you sell for 170, your commission's going to be $20,000. These are not illegal, but they are highly frowned upon. Can we see off the bat a conflict of interest? Can we see, why is the seller, if the seller understands this, why is the seller agreeing for you to get $20,000? There could be some conflicts of interest, some self-dealing. So net listing is not illegal yet, but it is highly frowned upon. So what I've done, back to the three: open listing, exclusive listing, and exclusive right to sell. I've given you guys this little chart, and this is in Learn, Test, Pass. This slide is in Learn, Test, Pass, so you guys don't need to write this down. I think this chart comes handy in a couple weeks from now when you're getting ready for the end of class exam. This will be a nice little summary for you to kind of put it all together. But this tells you the money signs mean that's when you get paid. So this tells you in the different relationships when you get paid. The open listing only gets paid when they bring the buyer. The exclusive agency gets paid when the listing agent or another firm brings the buyer. Exclusive right to sell, doesn't that look nice? We get paid, we get paid, we get paid. Exclusive right to sell is what you're going to deal with the majority of the time. So this is in Learn, Test, Pass for you guys. In North Carolina, there is a law. You know, we say the Real Estate Commission's main purpose is to protect the public, but they do some things for us as well. They do some things for us as well. And one thing that they have for us is this idea of a North Carolina protection agreement. What this is protecting is my commission. So let's say I'm working with a buyer and my buyer is interested in a for sale by owner. The for sale by owner is unrepresented. Yes, they chose to go to loan. They chose not to hire somebody. They chose to sell it themselves. The for sale by owner does not owe me commission. They don't have to do anything. So my buyer is interested in this for sale by owner. I call the for sale by owner and say, hey, I have a buyer. They're interested in seeing your property this afternoon. And the for sale by owner says, great, we look forward to meeting you. And I say, are you willing to pay my commission? The for sale by owner has the right to say no, don't they? If the FSBO says no, who's the only other party in the transaction? If the seller won't pay me, then who has to? The buyer. So the for sale by owner says, no, I'm not going to pay you. I'm unrepresented. I chose not to pay an agent. That's why I went it on my own. Great. Call the buyer. And you say, we're in for this afternoon. We got our showing appointment. By the way, that seller is not willing to pay me. So if you move forward with this transaction, you're going to have to pay me. That's what our agency agreement says. I will always ask the seller first, but if they can't or won't, then the buyer has to pay me. But what if you call this for sale by owner and you say, are you willing to pay my commission? And the FSBO says yes. Are you going to take them at your word? You just talked to this person. You just met him for the first time 3 minutes ago. Are you going to take this person at your word? I hope y'all are shaking your head no. Y'all trust me. The only person that's going to look after your commission is you. So when the for sale by owner says, yes, we're willing to pay you, when you go or somehow you need to get them, page 212 in practice, the form is called an unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement. Unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement. It's not an agency agreement. I'm in no way attempting to collect agency. What I'm doing is putting their agreement to pay me in writing. So now we have a legally binding document. So if they agree to pay me, again, the protection agreement is protecting my commission. In addition to the unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement, what else do I need to take to the for sale by owner? What else do I need to get in the for sale by owner's hands? Obviously, I want to protect my commission. What else do I need to give them? Yeah. Yeah. Don't I need to disclose to the for sale by owner that I represent the buyer? Doesn't the for sale by owner need to know that I don't work for you? I don't know you confidentiality. My client is the buyer. So either way, pay me or not, we need to do our working with real estate agent disclosure with the for sale by owner. They deserve to know that I don't owe them confidentiality. So yes or no to commission, they deserve to know. Another type of listing agreement that we may see is something called a limited service listing contract. Limited service listing contracts limits the service, but not the duties. When a seller hires a firm using a limited service, the firm owes the seller OCAR. It is an agency agreement, but I'm not providing full services. Maybe I have an a la carte pricing. I'll put your listing in MLS for $400. I'll do an open house for $350. You guys with me? All the services are a la carte. It's the difference in ordering the value meal or getting the #1 at Wendy's or just ordering a cheeseburger and a fry and a Coke separately, right? It's a la carte. Limited service listing contracts, again, they're agency agreements. We owe them OCAR. Some firms, this is how they operate. You need to refrain now from referring to these as discount brokers. That gives a negative implication, and the real estate commission is starting to come down on that verbiage. They're still a full service, a full duty broker, a full duty broker. I've actually been a buyer's agent on a couple of these. The first one I did, they offer my full commission, what my firm would consider a full commission. But all my communication, everything I did was directly with the seller. To this day, I've never had any form of communication with that listing agent. I emailed the seller, I texted the seller, I called the seller, everything in that whole and I'm not going to lie, I was a little concerned when I was instructed to contact the seller for everything, but come to find out this seller was an investor and he does this 20 times a year. He buys houses, flips them, and then sells them. And so really he just needed a firm to put his listing in MLS. He just needed a firm for exposure. I think one of you asked me about that last week. Can the seller just put their listing in MLS? This could be an option. You hire the firm just to put it in MLS. Now the firm still owes the seller OCAR, even though our services are limited, our duties are not. So, while the firm may not be receiving offers, they definitely can help the seller negotiate offers, counter offers, right? They're involved, they're just more behind the scenes. And by the way, when we got to closing on that one that I did, again, when I saw the closing disclosure, my commission was the full commission that my firm expects to collect. The limited service firm got like $450. So probably pretty much all they did was put it in MLS and maybe let them borrow a combo box or a lock box or something. So limited service limits the services, not the duties. And then we get to talk about our MLS. I feel like we've danced all around MLS for the last couple of weeks. So here we are now actually talking about it. MLS is our multiple listing services. This is how we cooperate with other firms. By joining the MLS that your firm is a member of, you join the same MLS that your firm is with. By joining that firm, thus that MLS, you are agreeing to cooperate with other members of that MLS. So you're pooling your listings. Remember, you guys, I'm a salesman and I need a product to sell. I need inventory, right? So MLS helps me create that inventory. Also in MLS, we see our offer of compensation. Again, when you look in MLS as an agent, it tells you, if you sell this home, how much you're going to get. That amount is an agreement between the seller and the firm, and it's all spelled out in our agency agreement. What if the commission being offered in MLS is not what your firm expects to collect when working with this buyer? For example, I had buyers once interested in a listing, and I went in MLS and I looked at the commission, and the commission advertised was 0.5%, 0.5%. Now, I'm not here to tell you guys what my firm's policy is, but I will tell you we expect to get more than 0.5%. I can be naive. I know this about myself. I can be quite naive sometimes. So what did I do? I called the listing agent. I said, hey, I think I found a mistake in your MLS. You're only paying me 0.5% commission. She said, no, ma'am, that's what my seller is willing to pay. Thank you. So if the seller is willing to pay me 0.5%, and my firm decides, if I bring the buyer, and my firm tells me that they expect to collect more, if the seller's only paying me 0.5%, who makes up the difference? Who pays the difference? I see some of your mouths move. There's only two parties to the transaction. So if the seller's not going to pay me, the buyer's up. So in that case, 0.5%, I said, thank you, have a nice day. Hung up the phone and went, wow, called my buyer. And I said, we haven't even seen the property yet. I said, if you move forward with this home that we're going to see this afternoon, you will have to pay some of my commission. They knew before we pulled in the driveway that what they were offering me wasn't enough. Could the buyer say, then no, we don't want to see it? Could they say it at that point? Sure. But we have these discussions up front. Once you put a listing in MLS, any website that you can find a listing for sale, every single website, it all feeds from the MLS. I put my listing in MLS and it goes to thousands, and I'm not kidding when I say that. It goes to thousands of websites. It all starts with MLS. That's another good way to pool our listing, to cooperate together. We're agreeing to allow my listing to be shared. I mean, my listing goes to Zillow and Realtor.com. It also goes to Allen Tate, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker. We're competing firms, but we're agreeing to pool our listings together. We're agreeing to share. Again, you guys, we're salesmen. Salesman has to have a product to sell, and MLS helps give us that product. So when we come back from break, we're getting ready to go to break. Don't go anywhere just yet, though, please. When we come back from break, we're going to jump into Learn, Test, Pass, and we're going to look specifically at our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. So we'll see this when we come back. Guys, if you come back from break late, please tell me in the chat. Is everybody good with that? This is why I make a big to-do about taking attendance. If you don't hear me make it a big to-do about taking attendance, then you've missed attendance, and you need to tell me when you get back in the chat, okay? So let's take 10. We come back, we jump in, and I got some questions in the chat. I'll try to address those during break as well. Yes. All right. All right, are we back? We are back, of course. Cameras are on. Big to do about taking attendance. Okay. All right, so I'm taking attendance right now. So let's go into Learn, Test, Pass. And before we look at our listing agreement, we're in the Unit 8 material now. And before we look at our listing agreement, I just want to show you guys, I have, this is Triad MLS input sheet. And guys, you're not going to be tested on this, but I get a lot of questions about what goes in MLS. So I just put this in here for you guys, FYI. Okay, y'all don't spend all your study time on this. All right. But this just gives you an idea of things that you can expect to see when you're putting a listing, at least in the Triad MLS. Again, I can't speak for others. And I'll let you guys go through this, but just so you know, everything you see in yellow is a required field, which means I cannot input the listing. I cannot activate the listing until I have this information. So listing agent, look, there's zoning, there's our deed booking page, tax information. There's a whole bunch of information the listing agents will do to get ready for it. Here's our listing type. Is it an exclusive agency, exclusive right to sell? Is it an auction? We looked at this the other day. Agency type is buyer agency, sub agency, or both allowed. Compensation, how much you're going to offer, compensation type and amount, how much you're going to offer the whomever brings the buyer. There we go, whomever brings the buyer. And of course, anything that's not highlighted in yellow, you're welcome to fill in. It just helps enhance the listing, right? So the more you can use to describe, possibly better, but there's no requirement. There's no law. So again, I have this in here for you guys just to kind of flip through and see. Don't spend all your study time on it. So that's in the Unit 8 material and Learn, Test, Pass. And where we're going right now is our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And I have highlights because the highlights, what you see highlighted on our listing agreement is mentioned in the syllabus. So I think you guys should sit down and look at the whole form. I really do. I mean, I really do. But at a minimum, I've tried to help you guys and hone it in on what the syllabus talks about. Remember, if it's in the syllabus, it could be a good candidate for a state question, right? So, or state exam question. So I've provided this information. That's what the highlights mean. Our exclusive right to sell listing agreement is entered into between the seller of the property and who? The firm. The agency agreement is between the seller and the firm. Terms of the agreement, we have to have an effective date. We have to agree on a date that we're going to market it. We also have to have an expiration date. Remember, one of our musts for agency agreements, they have to have a definite end date. So this agreement shall terminate at 11:59 on this date. So we're actually going to put the date in. Can we agree to extend it? Of course we can. Do we have to? No. Then we got the property information, street address, city, zip, county. It's located in North Carolina. And then we're going to put in some of the legal description. So what is the tax PIN number? What subdivision, deed book, etc. A lot of this information, as we just saw, is required for MLS anyway. So we've identified the property. We're going to talk to the seller up front about fixtures. We talked about fixtures back in Unit 2. But now we need to talk to the sellers about fixtures. And you can see it gives the seller's list of fixtures. Interestingly enough, this very list of fixtures shows up in our offer to purchase and contract. So before you ever list the property, we can have conversation with sellers like, are you going to take any of these fixtures? Right? Because if they're going to take them, then we need to figure out, are you going to take them before a buyer sees them? What are you going to replace it with? Or are you not going to take it until you move? In which case, I need to notify the buyer that this doesn't convey. So it's really important that we have conversations with sellers up front. That's why they put it in a listing agreement. We need to identify if there's any personal property the seller is willing to leave, assuming the buyer wants it. Just because the seller is willing to leave the refrigerator, does that mean the buyer automatically mean the buyer wants it? They may have their own refrigerator that's better, right? So this is what the seller might consider leaving. And then we need to identify the list price. We're going to talk about price in just a second. This is the one field. I mean, this whole form, this whole agency agreement should be complete before I and the seller signs it. It should be complete. But this is the one field that must be complete before the seller signs it. So in other words, I can't say sign it and then we'll decide on an asking price. We got to decide on this listing price before. This is a must. The seller has to complete that field. And then we talk about compensation. And again, I've kind of highlighted some things. You know, the firm agrees to collect a total of X amount. Remember, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. So what's the total commission that the firm expects to collect? When we earn our fee, we talked about the difference in when we earn our fee versus actually when we get paid. So I'll let you guys look at that. There's something called, and we need to have a conversation about this. There's something in our listing agreement called a protection period. Look with me, if you will, to page 218. That's correct, Haley. Just because the seller wants to leave the fridge doesn't mean the buyer wants the fridge. The buyer will only get the fridge if they put it in their offer. Yep. Page 218, you guys see where it says protection period clause? This is where real estate gets really fun. Protection period is also known as the extender clause, is also known as the override clause. All three of those things mean the same thing. Isn't that a good time? So what this clause says, protection clause is extender clause is override clause. What this says is that if I list your property and it hasn't sold within X amount of days after the expiration date. So we expire today and within X amount of days after the expiration date. If a buyer comes forward and brings an offer, even though it's expired, I still might be able to get paid. Let's say I have a listing and it expires today, August 2nd, 11:59 tonight. Tomorrow, a buyer brings an offer. Doesn't it stand to reason that it's my marketing and my advertising that brought that buyer to that listing? Couldn't we argue that? Because I've had it on the market for the last 4, 5, 6 months. So couldn't we argue that they learned about it through my marketing and advertising? So again, if within X amount of days of expiration, the seller sells, I may still be entitled to a commission. There are 2 caveats to this. In order for me to be entitled to a commission, I have to provide the seller with names of specific buyers. So this isn't just any buyer. This is Mr. and Mrs. Smith that I know are interested. So we expire today, Mr. and Mrs. Smith bring an offer tomorrow. Everybody good with that first caveat? This just can't be anybody out of the blue. This is somebody that I knew was considering. So I provide that name to my seller and say, if you sell your house to Mr. and Mrs. Smith within X amount of days, you owe me a commission. The second caveat, if we expire today and the seller lists with a new firm tomorrow, I'm out. Because now that other firm has an agency relationship with the seller. Even if Mr. and Mrs. Smith come forward, the new firm has a relationship. So as long as the seller doesn't relist, and as long as I provide names of interested buyers. The protection period may protect me. Do not confuse the protection period with the protection agreement that we just looked at a few minutes ago. Protection agreement is a for sale by owner paying my commission. Protection period is me possibly getting paid after the listing is expired. Protection period, you very well may see override clause, extender clause, or protection period clause. You guys got a big note on page 218? They like to do that to you in real estate. Any one of them are a good candidate for the exam. So when we earn our fee, and then we have to discuss how we're going to cooperate with other firms. Remember, I'm going to go back up just for 1 second. Remember, we already talked about how much the seller agrees to pay the firm. The seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. So the seller's already agreed to pay me X amount. Now we have to have a conversation of how much am I going to share with whomever brings the buyer. So cooperation with other firms. You can see here, I got a couple different options. I can cooperate or not with a sub-agent representing the seller, or we can cooperate with a buyer's agent representing the buyer. So whether or not the seller and the firm will allow sub-agency is going to be spelled out in the listing agreement. If we don't want or we don't allow sub-agency, then we're just not going to pay you, right? But if we are okay with sub-agency, then we would put an amount in there and then buyer's agency. So cooperation, how we share with other firms. Everybody good with that? Listing agent or seller pays listing agent pays, listing firm pays whomever brings the buyer. Several of your cameras are off. Are you? No. Then our listing agreement has to spell out the firm's duties. Remember, you guys, the listing agreement is a two-way agreement. The firm has duties and obligations to the seller. The seller has duties and obligations to the firm. So the firm is going to spell out their duties to the seller. The firm promises to make their best effort to find a buyer. They're going to disclose to the seller material terms of the offer. They're going to disclose to the seller material facts. Other professional services. If your seller needs, tax advisor, survey, structural engineer, I can help reference them to these professional services. I have a network of people. I got a guy in my office, you know what his favorite saying is? I got a guy. So when the buyer and the seller say, hey, I need somebody to, don't worry, I got a guy. He's got a guy for you. And that's what happens when you're in the industry and you get to know people and get to learn people. You get a guy to help with that. And then when your seller says, who can I use for a structural engineer? You'll have somebody to recommend. Providing agreement to the listing service. This is putting the listing in MLS. Here's our non-discrimination clause. This is another must. Remember when we were talking about musts? One thing that we must have is our non-discrimination clause. The agent firm shall conduct all brokerage activities in regard to this agreement without respect to the race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familiar status of any party or prospective party. Further, realtors have an ethical duty to conduct such activities without respect to sexual orientation or gender identity of any party. Again, I got a whole unit dedicated to this paragraph. So in Unit 19, we'll get into fair housing. We'll talk about those protected classes. We need to have a conversation with the seller on how we're going to market the property. What are the places we're going to put it? Of course, I tried MLS, but are we going to put it in as public marketing? Are we allowed to put signs in the front yard? Not everybody wants a sign, a for sale sign in the yard. Open houses, advertising on the internet, other than the internet advertising. We need to have conversation with the sellers about how I plan to market, what's my marketing strategy, and how I plan to sell your home. Lock boxes, combo boxes on the property. The seller does or does not authorize that. Seller has to acknowledge that I may not always be available when somebody else wants to show the property. We need to have conversations with our sellers about putting up valuables before showing, putting up things that can easily walk away. Y'all know what the number one thing that walked away was last year? Prescription medications. The Real Estate Commission has buyers and agents on video going through medicine cabinets. Have conversation with your sellers. Don't put that stuff, take it with you, lock it up, right? Anything like that. You'd like to think that people are honest, but they're not. And the seller's inviting somebody into their home, and they need to understand that I can't control everything that happens. I cannot control your listing on all those websites. I have zero control of Zillow. So if Zillow gets the wrong information, what can I do about it? Absolutely nothing. I can log in and fix it, but 1 hour later, it's going to get an update and go wrong again. So it doesn't do me any good. They just need to acknowledge these various things. A lot of this is out of my control. I get this asked a lot. I know it's not highlighted. As a matter of fact, I think this came up last week. The seller can have video. They could have video. They cannot have audio. Guys, it's not uncommon to walk into a seller's home. I mean, ring doorbells, hello, right? It's not uncommon to walk into a seller's home and see cameras. You need to conduct your life as if you're on camera because it's 2022. So there's a pretty good chance you're on camera. What they can't or shouldn't have is audio. Now, with that being said, I still caution my buyers because even though they shouldn't, again, we just can't trust everybody, right? Question come in, do buyer sellers care about being vaccinated or not? Well, wouldn't that be up to the individual seller and buyer? Wouldn't that be their individual preference? So video is allowed, audio is not. Earnest money, we're actually going to talk about earnest money in Unit 10. So let's not talk about this right now. Certain things that the seller has to represent. They have to represent how long they've owned the property. Are they facing bankruptcy or possibly facing bankruptcy? Is there a mobile home on the property? Is there an owner's association? Again, this is information that we are gathering from the seller. Flood insurance, here's our synthetic stucco, termite bond, and then here's our whole list of liens, current liens on the property with approximate balance. We talked about this earlier today. I need to make sure the seller can afford to sell. So there's a place for what? 3 liens, outstanding liens. If you got more than that, then you add an additional piece of paper. But we want to make sure that the seller is identifying all their outstanding liens because that helps us get the information we need that if they can afford to sell or not. Not all sellers can afford to bring money to closing. So we have this conversation up front. Is there a lease, a tenant in place on the property? Special assessments, fuel tanks. Again, you guys should look all this over. I know we're going through it quickly, but. And then there's the firm has duties to the seller. So the seller has duties to the firm. So the seller agrees to cooperate with the firm. The seller agrees to make the property available for showings. including working existing utilities. The seller agrees. We talked about this the other day. It's going to be awfully hard for me to sell your house if you never allow a buyer to see it. You got to put that effort. You got to allow buyers in the front door. Now we can be reasonable. You know, what if you wake up this morning and you have a fever? Well, we don't want to go in your house today, do we? So we can be reasonable. We can wait until you get better. What I'm talking about is if the seller never, ever, ever allows showings. That's not working with me. That's not cooperating with the firm to sell their home. Photograph and other material, again, not highlighted, but I get asked this a lot. When I come in to your home and take pictures for the listing, those pictures are my property. Now, I'm not going to take pictures of the stuff, right? I'm trying to take pictures of your space. One way sellers can help me is by decluttering before I take pictures. I mean, they got to pack it up anyway, right? They're getting ready to move. They got to pack it up anyway. I think there's something to be said for encouraging your sellers to take down personal effects. One, it declutters, but two, it's hard for a buyer to imagine themselves living there when we're looking at pictures of your kids. Does that make sense? So if we can take down some of the personal effects, then maybe we can get the buyer to imagine themselves living there. But either way, the pictures that I take are my property. Y'all make a note on page 10 is dual agency as it's explained to the seller. Dual agency as it's explained to the seller. If you guys don't read any of these other highlights, I think you should read this because it goes over the disclosure of information, the firm's role as a dual agent, the seller's role. It explains designated dual agency. And then we have, and this is new. If you saw the listing agreement prior to July 1st, you didn't see this. So this was just new effective July 1st. The seller has to initial one or the other. The seller either authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, or the seller desires exclusive representation and does not authorize dual agency. We have to have a yes to one or the other. And if the seller authorizes dual agency, do we want to take it a step further and allow designated dual agency? Remember, designated is a form of dual. In order to have designated, I first have to have consent to dual. So if they say yes to dual, we can take it a step further and try to get a yes to designated if your firm allows it. So we get, and again, we've had a lot of questions about this since we introduced you guys to dual agency last week. So I hope this helps because the listing agreement spells out yes or no to dual. And if yes to dual, do we allow designated? So starting on page 10, talks about dual agency. I really recommend you guys read this to help you better understand the duties and responsibilities of both parties. Termination, what happens if either party breaches, I'll let you guys look at that. Wire fraud warning. Wire fraud's gotten really big, really fast in real estate. We see a wire fraud warning to the sellers in the listing agreement. We see a wire fraud warning to the buyers in the buyer's agency agreement. We see a wire fraud warning to both in our sales contract. So we have two different ways to express the concerns, the dangers of doing wire fraud. And I'll tell you guys, we could spend all day talking about this. We're not going to, but I'll tell you just FYI, the best thing your clients can do to prevent wire fraud is to personally reach out to the closing attorney with wire transfer instructions. Don't rely on information in an email. That email may have been hacked, and those offshore accounts, the buyer may be selling their proceeds, sending their proceeds, or the seller may be asking to receive their proceeds to an offshore account. So the best thing you can do is look them in the eyeball and say, I will never email you wire transfer instructions. If you get those wire transfer instructions from me, let me know because I've been hacked and I need to address that. So we just need to make sure we are aware of that. Okay, so then the last page here, I got a place for 2 sellers information and 2 sellers to sign. So the seller is going to print their name and then sign their contact information, and then seller number 2. If the seller is an entity, if it's an LLC or a corporation, then we have a place for that as well. If you have more than 2 sellers, let me back up for a second. Everybody that has to sign to convey this deed and their spouses need to sign this listing agreement. We need to know that we have everybody on board on day 1. Again, as opposed to getting to the settlement table and somebody saying spouse didn't show up and they're not going to sign, thus we can't convey. So you need everybody that has to sign this deed and their spouses we need to get everybody on board now, and anybody that needs to sign to convey the deed and their spouses to sign this listing agreement. Once the seller sign, then I have a place down here for the firm to sign, so, or the agent. So we print the firm's name, firm license number, and it's signed by the individual agent with our license number, which is another one of those musts. Who can remind me in the chat? We talked about universal agent, general agent, special agent. What is my relationship with my firm? Universal, general, or special? You can tell me U, G, or S. Universal, general, or special? No question marks. Universal, general, or special? What is my relationship with my firm? Look at you guys. My relationship with my firm is that of a general agent. I don't have full power. I have some power. And some of my power as a general agent with my firm is that I am able to sign my firm's listing agreement on their behalf. This is an example of me being a general agent with my firm. Remember, the relationship is between the seller and the firm, but I can sign this on their behalf. Questions, comments? I know that's short and sweet of our listing agreement. At a minimum, the highlights, like we said, if it's highlighted, it's because it's mentioned in the syllabus. So at a minimum, I do suggest you look at that. You're eventually going to have to sit down and read the whole thing anyway, right? So why not start today? Special agent is the agent's relationship with the buyer and seller. So the special agent, that's my relationship with my buyer or seller. Universal has full power, general has some, special has how much? How much power do I have as a special agent with my buyers or seller? Zilch. Full power universal, some power general, back in unit 7. In your book, on page, starting on page 216, 216 to 221 also goes over some of these provisions that we just talked about. The suggestion of your book is to sit down with pages 216 to 221 in one hand and the listing agreement in the other. So kind of find in your book where it's talking about the listing agreement. Guys, just remember your book may have some information that's out of date. So what's current is here in Learn, Test, Pass. I will always have the current for you in Learn, Test, Pass. And you can see this is the one that was just revised on July 1st, July of 2022. So always refer to forms in Learn, Test, Pass, not in your book. But I think for the most part, you can use 216 to 221 to just help you give a little bit more information about some of these important provisions in your listing agreement. Okay. Exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Questions? Another thing that comes up with listings is determining square footage. And one thing we're going to do is help our sellers determine the approximate square footage of their home. The Real Estate Commission has provided us with guidelines to help us measure. Let's have this as one of these conversations that let's talk about it, and then I'll open it up for questions. Again, I feel like if you guys are busy typing, you're not listening, and I'm probably going to answer your question in just a second anyway. So is that good? Can we have the discussion, and then I'll open it up for questions with all. So just bear with me. When it comes to determining square foot, there are 3 requirements that the Real Estate Commission says we have to have in order for me to count it as heated living area. Now, heated living area can also be known as total living area. They got several different names for that too. But bottom line, what we're looking at is the part of the property that's acceptable for human dwelling. And in order to be counted as heated living criteria, we've got to have these first 3 things. First off, the space has to be adequately heated by a permanently installed heating system. Does that say anything about air conditioning? We just have to have heat. AC is a luxury. And it's got to be adequately heated by something that's permanently installed. You cannot put a space heater in the middle of the room and say it's got a heater. It's got to be a permanently installed. The space has to be generally accepted level of construction. We have to have finished walls, floors, and ceilings. You can't be looking at studs. You can't be looking at rafters. We have to have finished. When it comes to ceiling height, generally accepted level of construction says that ceilings need to be at least 7 feet tall. If there's anything under 7 feet tall, then we can't count it. And then it's got to be directly accessible to other heated living space. In other words, you need to be able to walk from room to room to room. Let's say, for example, you have a room finished over the garage. And in order for you to get to that room, you have to walk through the garage. Now, the garage is not finished. The garage probably isn't permanently heated, right? So in order to get to the stairs, to get to the room over the garage, you have to walk through the unfinished space. Because it's not directly accessible, I can't count that finished room over the garage in my total heated living criteria. I can advertise the heck out of it, right? I can say 500 additional square footage above the garage, but I cannot advertise it in my total heated living criteria. These 3 things are required. Now, it's about this time of the class that I start getting questions. You know, what about this? And what about this space that my brother has that da 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 da? I can't answer that because I've never seen it. But you guys can make sure it's got these 3 things. Is it adequately heated? Is it finished walls, floors, and ceilings? Ceilings at least 7 feet. And is it directly accessible from other heated living space? Guys, my team just put a listing out last week, and there was the main bedroom and a second bedroom on the first floor. And then upstairs, there were 2 other rooms that could be used as a bedroom. Why weren't they counted as bedrooms? Because the ceilings were only 6 foot tall. And general accepted level of construction says, so could I advertise that there's extra space upstairs could be used as a bedroom? Absolutely. But I couldn't include it in my bedroom count. I couldn't include it in my total heated living area criteria. We were a lot shorter 100 years ago, weren't we? So if you get an old historic home, it might be that the ceiling, and this one was about 100 years old. And so when it was built 100 years ago, our ceilings were lower. They've only gotten taller as we've gotten taller over the years. So these three things in North Carolina, square footage is not a material fact. The Real Estate Commission does not require us to report square footage. However, if we do advertise the square footage, then I am liable for the misrepresentation. If it's my listing, I'm responsible for determining accurate square foot. That includes whether I go out and list it myself, if I go out and measure it myself, or if I hire somebody to measure it for me. I'm responsible for it. So that person that you're hiring, you better make sure they know what they're doing. I would hire an agent with more experience. I would hire an appraiser, right? I would hire somebody. I would not hire the 18-year-old down the street. I would have, because either way, I'm responsible for it. Now, again, in the Triad MLS, square footage is a required field. The total square foot is a required field, but you're not going to be asked about the Triad MLS on your test, are you? You're going to be asked about the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And the Real Estate Commission says square footage is not a material fact. But if you guys look at listings, you know you see it regularly. Some MLSs do report as a range. The commission does allow, you know, a little bit of wiggle room because we're not expert measurers and they understand that. So they do allow us a range, you know, like 5%, give or take. They're not going to get excited if you're a little off. They may get excited if you're a lot off. And I need to be getting this information on my own. I cannot rely on tax records, builders' blueprints, previous MLS sheets that other agents, that's stealing somebody else's work. I need to either measure it myself or hire somebody to go out and measure it for me. When you're working with buyers, as a buyer's agent, you should be able to rely on the square footage in the listing unless you have a red flag go up. Guys, nobody, let's just pretend that the room, I'm just going to kind of make numbers up. Let's pretend that the room is advertised as 550 square feet. You're standing in a bedroom, it says it's 550 square feet. We had come later, have it measured again, and lo and behold, it's only 525 square feet. Nobody can walk in a room and eyeball that and say, this is off by 25 square feet. Nobody can do that. So that's what we mean by that error, that wiggle room. What if you advertise it as 550 and it's actually, I don't know, 300? Could you be able to walk in that room and say, dang, this doesn't look like 550 square feet? I mean, that's a huge discrepancy. And that's what we're looking for here, the huge discrepancies. If you see something like that, you should have a little red flag that goes up. I carry my measurer in my trunk. So if a buyer says, really, this is 550 square feet, it seems small, I can run out to my trunk real quick, get my tape measure and measure that room and say, no, it's only 300. So my point is that we should be able to rely on what's in the listing unless we have a flag goes up or unless your buyer says, are you sure this is 550? Somebody just asked me about above grade and below grade. I promise you I'm getting to it. Above grade, it doesn't have earth touching it. Below grade, all or some of it has earth. Appraisers don't put as much value on below grade. Appraisers have a different set of measuring criteria, a different set of guidelines. They don't follow the same guidelines that we do. And while it's not our responsibility to determine how much the appraiser might deduct for that below grade space, it is my responsibility to identify that there is some or all of the property that is underground that is below grade. Thus, the appraiser isn't going to put as much value on it. You guys see my picture here? This is what I mean by touching space. You see, you got this wall right here, and then you can't even see this wall, can you? Because it's touching earth. This whole lower level would be considered below grade because at least one side touches earth. And that's what we're referring to. Again, it's not my job to say, well, the appraiser is going to deduct X amount because it's below grade. I don't know how appraisers measure. If you want to know how appraisers measure, you need to sign up for appraisal school. What we need to understand when we're talking to buyers and sellers is that below grade has less. When we measure, we always start. Here's my house. Let's say it has a garage. Okay. So when we measure, we always start outside. And we measure corner to corner to corner, right? Until we make our way around the whole parameter of the property. Once I've measured outside, if this space is my garage that doesn't have the criteria, then I need to go inside and deduct that portion. So we get the total square footage, and then I go inside and deduct anything that doesn't count to get my total heated square footage. That's what we're looking for. How much heated square footage do we have? If you're measuring a property, again, if we look at our picture, and you're outside, in this example, I can't measure here, can I? Because I can't even see that wall. So I cannot measure this outside. You may also have a house where the second story is bigger than the first story. If you can't get to areas outside, then the rules say you go inside and measure exterior walls. Whoops. An exterior wall is any wall where the outside is on the other side of the wall. That's an exterior wall. So you go inside, you measure that, you measure the first floor outside, and then to do the second level, you go inside, upstairs and inside. And when you're doing that, measuring exterior wall, you always add 6 inches. So if you can't measure outside, if you cannot measure outside, then you go inside. We want you to be safe. I don't want you up on a ladder trying to measure. If you're measuring a condo, you always measure inside and you do not add 6 inches. Why wouldn't you add 6 inches to a condo? Because condo owners own from wall to wall, sheetrock to sheetrock. We wouldn't add those 6 inches. So at a minimum, again, you do all your measurements outside, you get the total square footage, you go inside and deduct something that doesn't count. Some agents will include room dimensions. They'll tell you that these are the dimensions of the kitchen and the living room and the bedrooms, etc. Again, not a material fact. Triad MLS doesn't require that. I don't know about other MLSs. What we do have to do in the Triad, at least, is the total heated square footage. So you measure from wall to wall, from here, from wall to wall. So you measure from here to here, and then I add 6 inches. And then I measure from here to here and here to here, right? I measure, make my exterior measurements, and then I add 6 inches. Let's go look in your books on page 743. Hold your place in the book. And let's go back to 743. We're going to call page 743 your measuring Bible. When you affiliate with your firms, you'll probably get an actual copy of this. They're everywhere. For you guys, for your exam, we're just going to focus on 744 and 745. For your exam, you will focus on 744 and 745. The gray box on 744 talks about above grade and below grade. Then right next to that, it gives us our 3 living criteria. It's got to be heated, it's got to be finished, and it's got to be directly accessible. And then 745 just kind of gives you some specifics. Remember, we talked about a bay window back in Unit 4. We learned how to measure that. That's only assuming you can walk into it. General rule of thumb, if you can walk on it, you can measure it. But if it's a bay window with a bench, we wouldn't count that because you can't walk on it safely. Attics, bonus rooms, etc. I also have a really good video. I'm going to put it in the chat over break. And it's a good video on measuring. I think there's more in the video than what you need to know, but it does cover what you guys need to know. So I'll put that. I just ask that you don't look at it now. You just save that, click on the link so you can grab it, and then wait and watch the video after class. I'll do that in just a second. The rest of Appendix C, again, is good stuff, but I wouldn't worry about it until you get in your firms and you start measuring. But skip ahead real quick with me to like page 750. The rest of Appendix C kind of gives you like a little workbook. So 750, we're looking at the floor plan of a 1-story with a basement and a carport. And then on 751, it kind of gives you those dimensions. 750, we're looking, or 752, story with a 2-story with an open foyer. 754 is a 2-story with a bonus room. 756 is a split. You guys see? So it's kind of giving you different floor plans, different diagrams, and how you can best measure those. All right, so real quick before break, let me go back and get questions. Does it have to be above grade? I covered that, above grade versus below grade. Septic tank issues. We talked about that back in Unit 6. I'll be happy to answer your question. I'm not sure what specifically you're asking, but we need to stay focused on residential square footage measuring. When measuring a kitchen, do you measure wall to wall or floor space? Yeah, I just do wall to wall. I got a toy, and it's a laser measurer. So I like hold it up to the wall and I click the button, and it goes boop, and it points to the other wall and it tells me how many feet and inches that is. And then I can go to this wall and I hold it up and point over there and I go boop, and it tells me how many feet. It's a fun toy. I put that on your list of toys you get when you become a real estate agent. But remember your goals. Before you can play with the toy and measure houses, what do you got to do? You got to pass the state exam and pass this class. So don't get so excited about measuring that you lose focus. Porches do not count because they don't have those 3 things. Okay, remember those 3 things. We have to have those 3 things. Not unless it's a finished porch that's directly accessible and it's heated. Do you add 6 inches to the total length? Okay, we got that. You're freezing up. Are you back now? Okay. Questions on square footage. This is one of these things that take practice. If you choose to measure your own listings, I promise you the first time you go out and measure a listing, it's gonna feel like it's gonna take you forever. I promise you will get better. Practice, practice, practice. When you affiliate with your firm, they may send you to watch somebody else measure, let somebody else, you shadow somebody. When you get your very first listing, they may send somebody with you. So I don't ever want you guys to feel like you're alone. If you affiliate with a firm that offers training and support, then you will be able to have assistance when you go to measure those first couple houses until you get better at it. My first listing, I got a general contractor on my team. I can't tell you the benefits of having a GC on speed dial, but the first listing I did, he went with me and we did measurements and we did pictures. And I know we were there about 4.5 hours, but he didn't tell me nothing. He let me figure it out on my own. And you know how you learn? You figure it out on your own. He was there to say attaboy or no, you didn't do that right. So it's a process. But again, for your exam, just focus on that, what I say, 745. I think that'll all be, you'll be tested on. Once you get your license, then you can go on to the little workbook section that goes through the different floor plans. So let's go ahead and take our break. Again, I'm going to put a link to a video in the chat during break. So we'll make sure you guys get it. So let's take 10. All right. Are we back? Does everybody understand that you turn your camera on for attendance and then you got to keep it on? You can't go away. I need you guys here. Okay, so cameras are on. Big to do about attendance. I'm taking attendance now. All right, so I put the chat. Did you guys see the link I put in the chat over break? Did you guys get that? Nope. All right, let me try it again. This is just a link again for a measuring video, and I have taken attendance. So if you just come back, please tell me in the chat so I can count you present. What this is, yeah, it's not gonna let me do that. Here, let me stop sharing. Hang on. Sometimes this helps. So what this is just a good, the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors and Piedmont Federal, that's who did it. They compiled this measuring series. And what I've provided with you guys is just the first video. The videos after this get into specifics about, you know, measuring a ranch and measuring a two-story, that kind of thing. But the first one is just kind of the general introduction. And you guys, please don't look at this video during class. We need to move on. So what I just ask is that you grab the link. You guys see it now? Everybody got it? So I asked that you just click on it and then hold it. Don't play it until after class. Is that fair? If I see you guys staring, gazingly blanking at me, I know you're watching the video and not paying attention to class. And we're going to talk about other stuff that is also on your test, possible for your test other than square footage. But I do think, again, the video, it goes over a little bit more than what you need, but it does cover what you need. And I think it does a good job of kind of explaining the process to you. And I know that's where a lot of the questions are. You know, you're ready to go out there and measure. I get it. You're ready to go take a picture of your new listing. You are so ready. And I get it. And I appreciate that. But we got to remember our goals. Okay. You're never going to get out to measure and to measure a home if we can't get you through these exams first. Is that fair? Is that fair? Okay, you guys have got to focus and you got to remember those goals. And thank you for telling me that you're back if I missed you, so you can be counted present. All right. So measuring, obviously something that comes up when we're working with sellers, helping them get the appropriate square footage. Another big thing that comes up that we kind of hit on a few minutes ago is helping the seller determine an appropriate listing price. And one way we can help the seller determine an appropriate listing price is by doing a comparative market analysis. I got a whole unit dedicated to CMAs. Unit 17 is our appraisal unit. And we do talk about CMAs. So we're not going to say a lot about these now because we know we're going to spend more time on them when we get to unit 17. When we're doing a CMA is not an appraisal. With a CMA, I'm helping the seller determine probable sales price. And please note this says sales price. If we determine the probable sales price is, I'm making numbers up, 150,000, wouldn't we want to list it for a little bit more to give some wiggle room for negotiations, right? What I'm telling the seller is this is how much I think it'll sell for. So we can use this to help us determine an appropriate listing price, an appropriate asking price. How much over 150? Well, it depends. What's the condition of the home compared to others nearby? What kind of market are we in? Right now, we're still in a strong seller's market, so that may make an influence as well. So again, we will talk about CMAs when we get to unit 17. We'll do the math for it and everything. It'll be a good time. You guys will enjoy it. The important thing to understand, and we talked about this with our listing agreement, you know, I should have everything filled out before I have the seller sign the listing agreement. But particularly, specifically, we've got to have the listing price determined before we can ask the seller to sign that listing agreement. We've got to be at agreement on a price before we can ask the seller to sign. So more on CMAs coming in Unit 17. Brokers have a duty to avoid conflicts of interest. And one conflict of interest, if I am personally selling my own home, I am the owner of record, and I'm also acting as the listing agent. Can I do both? As long as your firm allows it, sure. If I am personally listing and selling my own home, I cannot represent the buyer in that transaction. Remember what OLCAR says. OLCAR says I have my client's best interest. So OLCAR says I should have that buyer's best interest. Yes, the buyer's my client. But if I'm the owner of record, let's be very honest. Whose best interest do I actually have? Julie's, all day long. Can you guys see that conflict of interest? So I cannot represent a party, the other party in the transaction, when I am personally buying or selling. I can have somebody else in my firm. If the buyer contacts me and says, we want to buy, I can, get them to somebody in my firm to represent them, but I can't. Everybody good with that? Does that make sense? It'd be hard to convince a buyer that you have their best interest when it's your property that you're selling. There's an exception to this rule. That exception says if it's a commercial property and you have less than a 25% interest. If it's a commercial, you're selling a commercial property and you have less than a 25% interest, I can represent the buyer in that transaction as long as they get full disclosure ahead of time. They need to know that I have an ownership interest in the property. They need to know that I have a personal interest, not just my commission. Then we look at how listing agreements terminate. We actually saw this list back in Unit 7 when we talked about agency agreements in general and how agency agreements in general end. So this list is nothing new. Listing agreements, when they're over, they're over. So this just reminds us of the various ways that a listing agreement can end. One way it can end is by closing. Remember, the seller has hired me to do a very specific job. The seller has hired me to list and sell their home. So when we get to closing, I've done my job. Yes, I did what I was hired to do. I don't owe you agency anymore. The listing can expire. We saw a definite end date is a must for our written agency agreement. When it's over, it's over. Mutual agreement of the parties. The parties agree to get into the listing agreement together. They could agree to get out. Remember, the listing agreement is between the seller and who? The seller and the firm. So can you fire the seller? Probably not. If you're having problems with your seller, you need to contact your broker in charge. Let them deal with it. It's their listing after all. But mutual agreement, if the parties agree, could terminate the listing agreement if either party breaches. We saw in our listing agreement that there's firm's duties to the seller. There's also seller's duties to the firm. So if either party breaches, that could end the listing agreement. Operation of law, if the judge takes the property for any reason, foreclosure, bankruptcy, eminent domain. If the judge takes the property and no longer have a property to sell, that could end the listing agreement. Destruction of the property, if the house burns down, gets struck by lightning, etc., that could terminate the listing agreement. And then death or incapacity of either party, remembering the listing agreement is between the seller and the firm. So if the individual listing agent dies, the show goes on. If the individual listing agent's license goes expired or inactive, the show goes on. When we say death or incapacity of either party, the firm would have to shut down its doors. So either the seller dies or the firm dies. Everybody with me? Individual agent, it'll be reassigned, the show goes on. Guys, please understand too, with our listing agreement and our buyer agency agreement, we can agree to extend it, but we're not allowed to do an automatic renewal. So we can agree to extend it. We can sit down and have a conversation, extend it for 3 more months, but we can't agree up front to do an automatic renewal. And that's a big exception from our property management agreement. We'll see that we can when we get there in unit 12, but for the listing agreement, there is no automatic renewal. When it's over, unless we agree to extend it. Continuing on in unit 8, another thing for the sellers have to abide by the North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. And what the Disclosure Act does is it gives certain disclosure requirements to the seller. Now we're going to look at a couple different forms, one of those being the Residential Property Owners Association Disclosure Statement. Goodness, isn't that a mouthful? You guys good if I call that RPODS going forward? By golly, in real estate, if we can make an acronym out of it, we're going to. So RPODS is referring to the Residential Property Owner Association Disclosure Statement. I got another one that we'll look at in just a second. The RPODS is this is where the form gets interesting. The RPODS is a mandatory form with optional disclosure. It's required for the seller to complete it. They do not have to disclose anything. I need every single one of you, for attendance purposes, I need every single one of you to tell me in a private chat, remind me what caveat emptor means. Private chat, caveat emptor for attendances. If you don't know, then tell me, Julie, I don't know. I'm not looking for right and wrong. I'm looking to see if you're sitting here right now. I need to hear from each and every single one of you. I have concerns. Caveat emptor. If you don't know, then tell me, I don't know. I need to know that you're here. Caveat emptor. And I appreciate you guys' honesty. Thank you. Caveat emptor for attendance purposes. What caveat emptor says, it's Latin for let the buyer beware. Caveat emptor says that the seller doesn't have to disclose anything. Caveat emptor says the onus to learn about the property is on the buyer. It's the buyer's responsibility to decide to learn about the property so they can decide if they want to buy it. That's right. Somebody says it's all on the buyer. The seller doesn't have to disclose anything. And that's why the RPODS is a mandatory form with optional disclosure. They have to complete the form, but as we see in just a second, when we look at it, they have the option of saying no representation. Why doesn't the seller have to disclose anything? Because caveat emptor. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state, which means let the buyer beware. The RPODS is the seller's responsibility to complete. I cannot complete it for them. I can get them a copy. I can answer questions. I can assist them, but I can't complete it for them. Guys, I've never lived in this house. I can't speak for the terms of the house until I've lived there. So I can help the seller complete, but it's their responsibility. And the RPOs needs to be kept accurate throughout the listing period. In addition to the seller being able to say no representation, they could also say yes or no. This form is asking questions. Does this work? Does that work? Is there any problems with the roof? Are there any problems with the structural? Are there any problems with, electrical? Go through a whole long list of things. And the seller has three choices: yes, no, or no representation. If they answer and say, no, there's no problems with the electrical, let's just say. We're getting ready to list the property. The seller says, nope, no problems with electrical. Once we list, if there becomes a problem with the electrical, we need to get the seller to update the RPOs. The RPOs always needs to be accurate. It always needs to reflect the current condition. If something's broke and then they fix it, we need to update the RPOs. I have seen this second bullet point as a disciplinary action a lot lately. The condition of the property changed and the agent didn't update the RPOs. So y'all make sure you write down that second bullet point. This is one of these keeping you out of trouble once you get your license things. So what's the big deal? Why does the seller care? Caveat emptor, they don't have to disclose. Why do I have to fill out this form? Well, failure to fill out the form could give the buyer the right to cancel. Any deposits and fees they put down, they'll get back. So unless your seller wants to lose their buyer, they need to do this form. They need to do the RPOs. I wouldn't get too bogged down on whichever occurs first. If I were you guys, I would just focus on failure for the seller to provide the RPOs could give the buyer a right to cancel, could give the buyer a right to terminate. In this market, whatever, big deal. This buyer terminates. I got 20 other buyers standing in the front yard with offers in their hands. But I'm telling you guys, this market's going to change and it's going to be a buyer's market again. And the seller may wait months until they get an offer. Does the seller want to lose that buyer because they didn't do the form? So right now, whatever, not a big deal. It's going to change. If the buyer notices the home has an issue, if the buyer notices the home has an issue and you don't list it, I'm not following that question there. Can you put it another way for me in the chat? So the RPOs is one of the forms required under the North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. Okay, so thank you. The buyer can only back out because they didn't receive the form. They can't back out because they don't like that the seller said no representation. That's caveat emptor. Mandatory form, optional disclosure. Thank you very much for that. So the buyer's backing out because they didn't receive it, not because they don't like how it was complete. Somebody says so many forms. Yeah. You know what the Real Estate Commission's one of their favorite answers are? They got lots, but one of their favorites, I got a form for that. Don't worry, I got a form for that. So is there a form for that? More than likely, yes. And if there's not, get an attorney to draft one up. It's like that. That's why they provide us with the forms. So the RPOs is one form covered under the Act. Another form covered under the Act is the mineral and oil and gas disclosure. Going forward, we're going to call it the MOG. So I got the RPOs and the MOG. Y'all remember talking about this back in Unit 2? And I said, I got a seller disclosure. The seller has to disclose whether or not they have severed or intend to sever their subsurface rights. So that form is our MOG. Sellers are required to disclose whether they have severed or intend to sever. And we're going to go right now and look at, again, these are both in your book. I don't know if what's in your book is out of date or not, but just by sticking with what I say, we're always going to look and Learn Test Pass. I know for a fact I got the current forms for you guys in Learn Test Pass. So under the Unit 8 material, here's our RPOs. And again, I'll let you guys look at this. This form says our residential property and owner association disclosure statement. And it starts with instructions to the property owners. It tells them their responsibility for completing it. It goes through the sellers with their options. It tells the seller you can check yes, no, or no representation. If they check yes or no, they can't lie. If they feel the need to lie, their best bet might be to say no representation. But if they say no, there's no problems with the roof, there better not be any problems with the roof. You guys with me? The seller cannot lie. They don't have to disclose, but they can't lie. Then it goes into note to buyer. What happens if the owner doesn't give you the RPOs? Here's your canceling within 3 calendar days, etc. We list the property address, the owner sign it, and then the buyer. This is usually available in MLS. So buyers can see this through their agent before they even view the property. But once they decide to make an offer, this is going to accompany their offer. We're going to show the seller that we've seen it and the buyer signed acknowledging receipt. Then it goes on, and you guys can see it asks the seller a whole bunch of questions about the property. Here's about the foundation. Here's about the roof. Here's about leaking in the basement or crawl space, electrical system. It just goes through and asks the sellers a whole bunch of questions. This is a 1.5 pages of questions. And again, I'll let you guys look at this. And the seller's options are to say yes, no, or no representation. Thank you. Somebody said it's good. Everything's explained in the form. Guys, remember what I say. You don't need to recreate the wheel. Let the form help put words in your mouth. Everything you need to tell sellers right here. We just got to be familiar with the forms. So thank you for sharing that. So if the seller says yes to anything, they're saying, yes, this is broke. Yes, this isn't working. Yes, this isn't working properly. And if they say yes to anything, then they need to explain, why is it broke? Why is it not working, right? So yes is only good enough. If they're willing to say yes, then they should go in further and kind of like, kind of explain to us why. If they're not willing to explain, then they may just need to say no representation. Caveat emptor, this is absolutely the seller's right to say no representation if they choose. And it might be that the seller doesn't know. I mean, let's say, for example, you have somebody selling their parents' house and they haven't lived there in, 20 years since they went out for college, and they haven't lived there in 20 years. They may not know. No representation might be their honest answer because, they go home for Christmas, but they haven't actually lived there in 20 years. What if it's been a rental property for the last 30 years? You may not know because you haven't lived there. The second part of this form addresses if the property's in an owner's association, if we're in an HOA. So the second part of this form addresses owner association information. Again, I'll let you guys look at this. Let's see, Trina has a question. I don't know if you want to unmute or.
Yes, if you don't mind. Okay, so let's say that you have a listing on a house that maybe has radiator heaters and everything is working fine. But before the buyer, or let's say the buyer signs on the dotted line and they take possession of the home. When they move into the home, they realize, oh, there's a busted pipe and the heating doesn't work. Or maybe it's a sprinkler system and the sprinkler system doesn't work. What are the buyer's rights at that point?
Call an attorney. Because they can go back to the RPOs. If the seller said, yes, this works, they may have a case. But caveat emptor takes a lot of that responsibility off the seller. So when the buyer moves in after the fact, if they feel that they've been lied to or deceived, their option is to get an attorney and see how to proceed.
Would it be better to contact the firm and let them know what happened first to see if they would?
I would let the attorney, because what can the firm do? You know what I'm saying? So okay. If the seller says yes, that's a flat out lie and they can't do that. I don't remember if we've seen it yet or not, but we got something called the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. And that says the seller can't. So any recourse after settlement is going to have to be through the attorney. Remember, my agency agreement's expired. I'm not involved anymore, am I? Because closing ended that agreement. So what can I do? Call the seller and say you lied, and they say, nuh-uh. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, maybe the buyer will contact the seller directly, but they're probably not going to get far. So when that buyer calls you and says, this is broke and they lied about this and they lied about that, what do? We need to advise them to contact an attorney. Is this form required for FSBOs? Great question. And the answer is yes. This form is required for all property owners. So if you're a buyer's agent working with a buyer and you call that for sale by owner and you say, have you done the RPOs yet? Don't say RPOs because they're not going to know what you're talking about. You say Residential Property Owner Association Disclosure Statement. The FSBO says, huh? You need to send it to them. It's every agent's responsibility to make sure that the buyer gets a completed copy. So FSBOs are not exempt. The other one covered under the Act is the MOG. Again, I'll let you guys look at this. Instruction to property owners goes over their rights. This talks about mineral and oil and gas rights. Caveat emptor does have a little exception to this form. I think the best way to see this form is to divide it in two. So the first section goes over mineral rights, and it asks the seller, mineral rights were severed by the previous owner, in which case the seller can say yes, no, or no representation. And then it asks the seller has severed the mineral rights or the seller intends to sever the mineral rights. And you will note no representation is not an option. When it comes to the seller has severed or intends to sever, the seller's only options are to say yes or no. This is a little exception to caveat emptor. They have to disclose this. And then we go over that similar exercise, do the same thing with oil and gas. So if they've severed or they intend to sever, if they have severed or if they intend to sever, we need to get an attorney involved because there's lots of legality that go on with severing subsurface rights. So if the seller has severed or intends to sever, then we need to get an attorney involved. Again, note to purchasers discusses their 3 days to cancel if they don't receive it. Again, they're not agreeing with how it's completed. They're just agreeing receipt, and then everybody signs. And again, this is, the majority of the time, this is available in MLS. So you can see this before you go see the property. But once your buyer says, I want to write up this offer, then we need to get these seller signed disclosures. Once they're in MLS, they're already signed by the sellers. But we need to get the buyer to sign acknowledging receipt and submit this with our offer. Leases, the seller has to complete. The only exception, let me rephrase that. The biggest exception to the RPOs is new construction. Never before lived in dwelling. Never before lived in dwelling is exempt from the RPOs. It's not exempt from the MOG. And there are a couple other like court ordered sales, that kind of thing. They might be exempt, but the big exception that you guys would need to know about for the RPOs is new construction. Never before lived in dwelling. They absolutely have the right to say no representation. That is caveat emptor. Somebody asked me if figure 8.3 is accurate. I don't know offhand. What I do know is what's in Learn Test Pass is the current. I don't know if there's any changes, but what I do know, all of the forms, all of the current forms are in Learn Test Pass. So when it comes to the Property Disclosure Act. Understand the Property Disclosure Act covers both the RPODs and the MOG. Okay, the act covers both forms, the seller's duties and obligations. So what's our responsibility when it comes to the act, when it comes to these forms? Well, we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts, regardless of how the seller completes the RPODs. If the seller's lying, we obviously want to encourage them not to do so. If the seller says no representation, that doesn't negate the fact that I have a duty to disclose material facts. And all agents in the transaction need to help get that form to the buyer. Again, if the property is listed in MLS, 98% of the time it's going to be included as an attachment to listing. Don't write that number down. But the majority of the time it's going to be included as an attachment. If it's a for sale by owner, the buyer's agent may have to get the RPODs and the MOG to the for sale by owner. They may or may not know that they're required to complete it. Questions? What if you're on a listing appointment and I don't know, the seller tells you the roof leaks, don't say anything. And you say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, remember we had this conversation at the very beginning and I always have a duty to disclose material facts, regardless of how you fill this form, regardless of whether or not you want to disclose, I always have a duty. And the seller says, no, you work for me. I'm telling you not to disclose. You're not going to do it. You guys remember Old Car? And one thing that Old Car says is that I follow my clients' lawful instructions. They can't make me violate license, law, and commission rule. So just because the seller demands, just because the seller insists, that's no reason for me not to disclose. If you explain it over and over and over again, my governing licensing body says I have to disclose these material facts. And the seller says, dang it, if you work for me, you're going to keep your mouth shut. You may want to reconsider taking that listing. You may not want to work with that seller that's putting your license on the line. Is that one transaction worth your entire real estate career? I can't answer that for you. But if your seller is insisting on you violating license, law, and commission rule, you may want to do yourself a favor, tell them to have a nice day, and walk away. They cannot make you violate license, law, and commission rule. And disclosing material facts is a violation. Questions? Can the buyer rescind once they learn the truth? So if they find out, they can call their attorney. I can't offer legal advice. Guys, let's do this. If the parties can't agree to agree, then we may need to get an attorney involved. Remember, I can't make anybody do anything. So if we discover the buyer may have an out, and we'll see that when we look in our contract, but the buyer's recourse may be to hire an attorney. And that happens. Sometimes they get somewhere and sometimes they don't. There are risks involved in buying a house. Yes, there are lots of risks involved, but can we be fair? There's risks with a lot of things, isn't there? A lot of things in life. Buying a house is no exception. We'll talk about the buyer's under contract process. We'll start talking about that a little bit in Unit 10, but mostly we talk about the buyer's under contract process in Unit 21. their rights, things they should consider doing. All right. So we've been talking a lot about working with sellers. Let's switch gears and talk about working with buyers. Why don't you guys remind me in a chat, what's one of the very first things I should do when I start working with a buyer? What's one of the earliest things I should do when I meet a buyer, or a buyer calls me and says, we want to hire you as our agent? It's one of the earliest things we should do. Look at you guys. Not the contract, but the working with real estate agent disclosure. So once you start, you say, hey, let's come in for a buyer consultation. Sit down, offer them coffee or water, sit down, and then you're going to want to do your disclosure first. Yes, that's one of the very first things we want to do is our working with real estate agent disclosure. Get that out of the way, because you know you're going to learn. I mean, part of that buyer consultation is to ask them questions like, what kind of property are you looking for? How much can you afford? We know we're going to bump into these first substantial contact things anyway. So let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. The Real Estate Commission says, particularly with buyers, but the Real Estate Commission says that once we do our working with real estate agent disclosure, at that point, we need to decide in what capacity we're going to work. I need to know how to proceed. Am I going to proceed as a buyer's agent where the buyer is my client? Or am I going to proceed as a seller sub-agent where the buyer is my customer? If I'm a buyer's agent, the buyer is my client. If I am a seller sub-agent, the buyer is my customer. Don't I owe different duties to my client, my customer? So how old car client gets the old car, customer gets what? Honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. So if I don't identify our relationship, how do I know how to proceed? Disclosure is for consumers when we first meet them. Agency agreements are for our clients. If the buyer chooses to be a customer, if they choose to go unrepresented, that makes me a seller sub-agent. We explain what that means. It's all spelled out in the disclosure, that Q&A brochure that's in Unit 7. The buyer is unrepresented. If I'm a seller sub-agent, the buyer is a customer. And before I can show the property, I need to make sure via MLS that the seller and the firm has agreed to allow seller sub-agency. So if you go into MLS and it says buyer's agent only, you cannot show this property to your buyer customer because the sellers have said no. So let's say you've been working with a buyer. How often? Me personally, never. Your test is not going to ask you how often you run into it. What is your test going to ask you? What is seller sub-agency? Can you work with a buyer without an agency agreement? Do your head one way or the other. Can you work with a buyer without an agency agreement? Yes, as a seller sub-agent. That's what your test is going to ask you. You might be that you start, maybe it's of my opinion that buyers that choose not to be represented, maybe the agent didn't present it well. This comes with practice and experience, but maybe the agent didn't present this well and the buyer just chose this, not knowing what they were chosen. So let's say the buyer chooses seller sub-agency because that seems like the safest option for them right now. And then later down the road, the buyer asks if they can switch. I've been a seller sub-agent, but now they want me to be a buyer's agent. They want to go from being a customer to a client. They want an upgrade on the airplane. They want to go from coach to first class. First off, start with this last bullet point. The Real Estate Commission says switching is strongly discouraged. again, I think if we're doing our jobs properly up front, why wouldn't they want to hire me, right? Why wouldn't they want me to be their buyer's agent? Again, that just comes with practice and experience. But basically what you're doing when you're switching, you're upgrading your buyer from a customer to a client. The problem with that is to the seller. You had formerly been a seller sub-agent, a representative of the seller, and now the buyer's saying, I want to be represented now. Can you make that switch? If, y'all hear me stress the word if this happens, you can only do it with fully informed consent. If you know anything personal about the seller, we need to remind them what we know. Because once I make that switch from a sub-agent to a buyer's agent, my duty, my loyalty, my obligation is now to the buyer. The buyer becomes my client. And I tell my client everything about my customer. I tell my customer nothing about my client. So if I'm going to do this, we have this conversation with the seller. We get their permission. Yes, I would get it in writing without a doubt. But we have to get their consent, reminding them what we may know about them that I would have to share with my buyer once they become my client. Some firms may offer a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. It's still an agency agreement, but it's non-exclusive. In a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, how many firms can the buyer date? How many firms in a non-exclusive? They can play the field, can't they? They can date as many firms as they want to. So in a non-exclusive, it's still an agency agreement and it's in writing. We actually have a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. The only firm that's going to get paid, though, is the one that connects the buyer to the seller. The one that shows the buyer the property that they ultimately buy. Some firms will allow this, some won't. When we talk about procuring cause, by the way, what procuring cause answers is which agent, based on their actions, led to the buyer buying this house. Was I the one that introduced you to this property? Was I the one that showed it to you? Was I the one that helped you submit the offer? I would have procuring cause. It's because of me that you found this property. It's because of me that you were under contract to purchase this property. That's what we mean by procuring cause. Sometimes procuring cause can be difficult to prove. The best way I know to prove procuring cause, here it is again, you guys, is with your documentation. What do you document? Everything. I think I have non-exclusive buyer agency agreement and Learn Test Pass. We'll see in just a second. If not, I'll get it in. This is not the one that we're going to look at together in just a second, but I think if I don't have it in there just for you guys to peruse, I will put it in. I'll check it in a second. Can I please answer that later? Back in Unit 7, we talked about oral buyer agency. Why don't you guys, here it is again, chat time again, private chat. Under an oral buyer agency agreement, what do I owe this buyer? Under an oral buyer agency agreement, what do I owe this buyer? Under an oral buyer agency agreement, what do I owe this buyer? Under an oral buyer agency agreement, I need everybody to see this, please. An oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. And under an agency agreement, I owe that person old car. So an oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. And I do owe them old car. It's express, which means the terms have been clearly stated. Express says those terms can be stated either orally or in writing. So even though they haven't signed anything yet, I still owe them old car. What do they owe me? Absolutely nothing. Why do we put this stuff in writing? So I can secure my commission. I can only get paid with a written agency agreement. They don't owe me commission under oral. Can you follow up with an email? Absolutely, you guys. Anytime you have a conversation of substance, may it be face-to-face or on the phone, how do you document that conversation? You go home and type out an email per our conversation today. Da, 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 da. That's the only way I know to document a verbal conversation. Oral buyer agency says we can work with a buyer under an oral agreement at first, but we have to reduce it to writing before I present the offer on the buyer's behalf. I cannot present an offer on a buyer's behalf without reducing that relationship to writing. So the latest I have to put my oral buyer agency agreement in writing is when I'm ready to present an offer on their behalf. Why? Because it protects your commission. I can't guarantee you're going to get paid on a handshake. If we got a written agreement, now we got something to take in front of the judge, don't we? So we're protecting your commission. We're solidifying the relationship and we're protecting your commission. So oral buyer agency is an agency agreement. I do owe them old car. Remember, oral buyer agency cannot be exclusive. Exclusivity is reserved for written agency agreements. If we're under an oral agreement, I cannot demand exclusivity. The buyer is free to date as many firms as they want. And an oral agreement can't be for a specific period of time. Under an oral agreement, I can't say you're going to work with me for 2 weeks. If I demand exclusivity, or if I demand a specific period of time, then I got to put that oral agreement in writing. I cannot demand exclusivity. It cannot be for exclusive. Exclusive is a key word. If you guys see a test question and it says exclusive, is it oral or is it in writing? It's in writing, right? Because oral cannot be exclusive. You cannot demand exclusivity. So under an exclusive buyer agency agreement, it's in writing. The buyer's only dating one firm and that firm gets paid. They get a success fee upon closing. Agency agreements, either we got an expiration date, a definite end date, or upon closing. Remember, I'm being hired to do a very specific job. In this case, the buyer's hiring me to help them locate and purchase a property. Once they buy that house, once they get their new deed in their name, they get the keys in their hand. I've done my job. I did what they hired me to do. Okay. Right. Let's take, somehow it's our last break. Today's gone by too fast. So let's take 10. We come back. We keep going in unit 8. We are back. So we are taking attendance. Say cheese. So what we're going to talk about now, still working with buyers. As a buyer's agent, once you've been hired, once the buyer has hired you, may that be in writing or orally, once you've been hired, there are certain duties that we owe that buyer. Trinity, I'm sorry, I got 3 screens. I do not see you. All right, so we've been hired to do duties, so we need to talk about what those buyer's agent's responsibilities are. We're going to spend a good amount of time on page 239. This slide is focusing on page 239. Okay, so we're going to go through and talk about some of our responsibilities, our agents, and those bullet points kind of help sum things up for you. We're good with this. What's one of the first things we said we were going to do when we meet a buyer? We're going to do our disclosure. We're going to let the buyer know, I don't know you confidentiality. We're going to let the buyer know that they can hire me. We're going to have this working with real estate agent disclosure conversation about with the buyer. We're going to explain our agency duties and responsibilities. That's spelled out in our buyer's agency agreement that we're getting ready to briefly look at in just a second. So we're going to talk about those agents and duties. If the buyer's ready and willing to enter into a written buyer's agency agreement, then sure, get them to sign. Maybe your firm will have a policy about whether or not you can work with a buyer under an oral agreement. Some firms will allow it, some firms won't. Some agents do it, some don't. Again, your test is not going to ask you what you're going to do. Your test is going to ask you what you can do. If they're willing to sign, then yeah, go ahead and get that thing executed. Go ahead and get it signed. We need to help our buyer get pre-qualified. Now we're going to talk about pre-approval and pre-qualification, what all that means when we get into our financing units in 14 and 15. But we can help the buyer. You know, once we do our working with real estate agents and the buyer starts rattling off all the things they want, a 3-car garage and a pool and 5 acres and all that, don't we need to find out how much house they can afford? Don't we want to figure out how much house they can afford before we start wasting our time showing them a bunch of properties just to find out that they can't afford it? So very, very, very early in the relationship, we're going to tell them they need to call a lender. Most buyers don't personally know lenders. Again, I can say, here's a list of 2 or 3 lenders that I've used in the past. Understanding they're welcome to use any lender they want. It's their loan, but I absolutely can make recommendations. Get that pre-approval or pre-qualification letter in our hands before we ever start seeing and viewing property. Again, we'll talk about that. We're going to help the buyer in getting the disclosures. There's our RPODs and our MOG. And if the home was built prior to what year? The lead-based paint disclosure. What's the magic year for the lead-based paint? You guys are so cute. I can see your mouse move. The magic year for the lead-based paint, you're off by 1 year, is 1978. So if the home was built prior to 1978, the seller provides that lead-based paint disclosure along with the RPOs and the MOG. And we just need to get the buyer to look over them and sign, acknowledge, and receipt. Disclose agency status to all parties to the transaction. Remember we talked the other day, buyer's agent. In this case, I have been hired as a buyer's agent. And when I reach out to the seller or the listing agent for the first time, my initial contact, I need to identify my role. My name is Julie Campbell, and I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your property or your listing. So we need to disclose our agency status to all parties. Always discover and disclose material facts. I never have a reason not to disclose material facts. That's worth me saying about 7 more times. I never have a reason not to disclose material facts. We always disclose material facts. Performing a CMA to help the buyer determine offer price. Remember, we just briefly mentioned CMA when helping the seller determine probable sales price. But I'm going to do the same thing with the buyer. When the buyer walks in the front door and says, this is the one, let's write it up, the very next thing they're going to look at you and say is, how much should I offer? Are you just going to blurt a number out there? Are you going to tell them to offer asking price? Are you just going to open your mouth and let a number fall out? Are you going to do a little research and making sure that you're giving them an educated response? That educated response is
Credit card.
CMA. Yes.
Thanks. And by the way, USAA offers translation services.
All right.
If
We're
you're
going to call that an
in a
accidental unmute. And I hope we're focusing too. So we're going to do a CMA for that buyer. We're going to help them determine what a good ask or offer price is. We're going to assist in the preparation of, the presentation of, and the negotiation of their offer. When your buyer tells you to submit an offer on their behalf, you're going to treat it like it's the best dang offer you've ever seen. Even if you think it's lowball and it's insulting and the seller's going to say no right away, it's your buyer's offer. So we're going to pretend like this is the best offer in the world. We're going to present it with pride. I can't tell you how many times I've had agents call me and say, I'm getting ready to send you an offer and it's not that good, but why would you tell me that? How are you representing your buyer by telling me that, right? So even if you know it's not good, be proud. It's your buyer's offer. So we're going to help them, do what we can to help them. And then we're going to assist them getting through closing. And this last bullet is what we refer to as the buyer's contract to closing process. And this is what we are going to introduce you to in Unit 10 and talk more about in Unit 21 is the buyer's contract to closing process. There's a whole lot of things that they need to make sure that they do. So this just gives us, again, we're on page 239, and this just gives us a quick rundown. Obviously, this isn't everything, but this just kind of gives us an idea of our responsibilities of a buyer's agent once we've been hired. Is everybody good? The buyer can hire me with a written agreement. They can hire me with an oral agreement. It's express. The terms are clearly stated, maybe oral, maybe in writing. As a buyer's agent, you may also be communicating directly with sellers. If your buyer is interested in purchasing a for sale by owner, the for sale by owner doesn't have an agent. They're unrepresented. So you may be communicating directly with the FSBO. Guys, remember, my loyalty is to the one that hired me, not necessarily the one that pays me. The for sale by owner didn't hire me, did they? Even if they pay me, they didn't hire me. It's the buyer that hires me. Thus, they are the one that gets OCAR. They're the one that gets client level service. And then we also briefly mentioned earlier today that limited service broker, limited listing service. You may have no communication with the listing firm or agent at all. All of your communication may be with the seller. And guys, in either of these situations, it's really important that you always remember that you represent the buyer. The buyer is the one that gets OCAR. You're going to be talking a lot to the sellers in both of these scenarios, but they aren't the ones that hired you. They aren't the ones that get OCAR from you. Everybody good on that? Fair enough. What do the FSBO and the limited service listing seller get? Let's go through this together. They get honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. And that's it. That's where it ends. What does our customer get? Honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. So now what we're going to do, I'm on page 240. We're going to go in and look at our exclusive buyer agency agreement. Again, real quick, I got highlights like we did with the agency or with the listing agreement. 240 and 241, we're going to see a lot of similarities between the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement. But 240 and 241 tell us some things that we see in the buyer agency agreement that we don't see in the listing agreement. So a lot of the other provisions look the same. By the way, I don't have that non-exclusive buyer agency agreement Learn Test Pass, so I'll put that in this afternoon. I don't want you guys to get bogged down on that, but I do want to make it available in case you want to look at it. The one I want you guys to focus on is the exclusive buyer agency agreement. And again, the highlights are provisions that are provided that are mentioned in the syllabus. So why do I have it highlighted? Because the syllabus talks about it. Once again, I think you guys should look through this whole thing. I think there's some important stuff in here, but at a minimum, just focus on the highlighted information. Okay. So exclusive buyer agency agreement is again between the buyer and who? The firm. This does not say Julie Campbell, individual agent, does it? It says whatever firm I work for at this time. That is who the relationship is with. One thing we see different in the buyer's agency agreement that we don't have in the listing agreement is the type of property. Am I helping my buyer purchase a residential property, a commercial property, or other? I also need to put a general location. General location can be the state of North Carolina. That's kind of vague, isn't it? It could be the Triad. It could be Forsyth County. It could be Winston-Salem. It could be Ardmore subdivision. Wherever your buyer's thinking about looking, okay? We just want a general location, a general idea of where I can represent them. If later down the road, your buyer decides to look outside of their general location, we can always edit this, right? And how do I edit an agreement in writing? I edit it in writing. So we would cross through, strike out, get everybody initial and date. You could also use this, and we mentioned this last week. Remember, we talked about with the oral buyer, if now we're ready to present an offer and they're hesitant to enter into a written agreement with you, obviously you haven't built their trust, but they want to make an offer, but they're hesitant about entering into. We could use this general location just for one property. So if you're hesitant to enter into a buyer's agency agreement with me, maybe I can get you to enter into a buyer's agency agreement just for this one property, so I can present an offer on your behalf. So general could be as specific as one address. It could be as vague as the state of North Carolina. I'd advise you not to do that. But we're just trying to get an idea of where the buyer is purchasing. If we enter into with just one address and the buyer buys, I got them covered. If the buyer doesn't buy 123 Main Street, again, hopefully I have earned their trust. And now we can come back and edit this to, you know what, Forsyth County or, you know, wherever. So just because 123 Main Street doesn't work out may not mean that it's over. Maybe we've built their trust and now we can get them to look, keep going in other properties. So type of property is one thing that's different in the buyer's agency agreement that we don't see in the listing agreement. The term of the property, again, all of our agency agreements have a definite ending date. So the term of this agreement shall begin on today. And then I have a couple options. It's going to terminate. There's an option for a buyer who intends to purchase a single property. When does that expire? Or there's an option for a buyer who tends to purchase more than one property. So think about an investor. Somebody calls you and says, I want to buy 20 homes this year. Can you help me? Yeah, you bet I can. So we would use that. And then we're not saying that it terminates when you buy the property. We're saying it terminates because now you're buying 20. So we have a couple different options here. This is an agency agreement. Agency agreement is an employment contract. All employment contracts have to talk about compensation. When do we get paid? When do we expect to get paid? Guys, remember what we said. If the seller can't or won't pay me, there's only one other party to the transaction, isn't there? There's only one other person. And this is what our buyer's agency agreement says. The firm shall seek the fee from a cooperating listing or the seller if there is no listing firm. So we tell our buyer, I'm always going to ask the seller to pay my commission first. If the buyer purchases a property where compensation is less than the fee or where no compensation is offered, buyer and firm agree that buyer will pay the difference. So our agency agreement spells it out. It says, I'm always going to try to get the seller to pay me first. But if they can't or won't, you have to. Remember my buyer interested in the property? Agency, the commission offered was 0.5%, a 0.5%. Y'all, that ain't going to pay the bills. A 0.5% is not going to pay the bills. So what did I do? I had to go to my buyer and say, if you move forward with this property, you're going to have to pay me X amount in commission. And that's what our agency agreement says. It's spelled out. It's pretty clear. So compensation of firm. We mentioned earlier about the retainer fee. If your firm allows, this is where you collect the retainer fee. We also need to, we talked about bonuses, for example. If we stand to make more than the stated commission, we say right here, buyer agrees that the firm's fee for services shall be in the amount of whatever your firm's policy is. If we stand to make more than this, then we need to get the buyer's permission. We need to get the buyer's full and timely disclosure to receive that bonus because we're making more than what we agreed to. We'll talk a little bit more about fees, or excuse me, bonuses when we get to license law and commission rule. But here it is, the verbiage right here that you guys can go ahead and look at. We talk about when our commission is earned. Remember, I earn my commission when I connect a buyer or seller. I typically don't get paid until it closes. Does everybody hear the difference? Earned versus when you get paid. When you earn it, when you pay it, it spells it out. Here's that protection period again. If our agency agreement expires, and then the next day, the buyer goes to buy a home that I introduced them to, I still could get a commission. Protection agreement, override clause, extender clause that we looked at. It's a contract between the firm and the buyer. So the firm spells out their duties, general duty of performing, seeking property at a price and terms acceptable to the buyer, presenting offers and counter offers. I owe my buyer the duty of confidentiality. Here's our non-discrimination clause again. Buyer's duties to the firm. They first off agree to work exclusively with me. They can only date me, right? They're only date one firm. But they can't hinder my efforts, right? If they help me to hire me to help them find a property and purchase a property, they can't hinder my efforts. They can't hinder me from doing my job. Do you guys think buyers' minds change sometimes? Once they get out there and start looking at properties? Absolutely. So your buyer consultation, you have a conversation and they say, we need this, this, and this. And you go out and show them 5 properties and they're like, maybe I don't need this. Maybe now I want that. We need to keep up with their changes. Sometimes they don't really know what they want until they get out there and start looking at properties. Think, for example, first-time home buyers. They may not know what they want until we get them out there. So y'all just be prepared to shift gears. Be prepared to shift that search criteria because buyers' minds change. A lot of it may depend what's available. Part of the problem of this market is we have low inventory. So buyers can't afford to be as picky as what they think they want to be when we first start, right? So we got to be prepared for buyers' minds to change. Here's that other professional advice again. I think this comes up more with the buyers than the sellers, because now the buyers are looking for me. Who do you recommend for a lender? Who do you recommend for a closing attorney? Who do you recommend for a home inspector, pest inspector, surveyor? They're looking at me to offer them advice. I'm never going to look at a buyer and say, this is the lender we're using, period, end of story. This is the home inspector you're using and you're going to like it. It's not my mortgage. It's not my home inspection. All these decisions are up to the buyer. I'm going to give them choices. Here's a list of 2 or 3 home inspectors I've used in the past. Don't just send them to Google to search home inspections, right? They can do that. Don't do that for them. If you're new to the business, you may not have formed these relationships yet. Your firm probably has a preferred vendor list. So until you get to know home inspectors and lenders and closing attorneys, you can probably advise from your firm's preferred vendor list. Confidentiality of offers. We'll talk about this in license law and commission rule, but the real estate commission prohibits the agent from disclosing the terms of an offer without that person's permission. So I can't tell you what somebody else offered unless I have their permission. Is that person going to give me permission to tell you what they offered? Probably not. Obviously, this applies to the listing agent, but where this might apply to the buyer's agent, what if you're working with 2 buyers and they're both interested in 123 Main Street? Can I pit my buyers together? Can I throw them in the ring and say the best offer? I'm talking to each of them separately. Everybody has different wants and needs, different risk tolerance, right? I'm providing the same information for them to make their own decision. But when buyer A says they're going to offer this amount and buyer B says they're going to offer more, I can't go back to A and say, you're not going to be competitive if you don't up it. Does that make sense to you guys? I can't pit anybody together. Buyer's agency agreement, top of page 4. This is dual agency as explained to the buyer. So at the very least, here's another way to expose yourself to dual agency. The firm's role is the dual agent, the buyer's role is the dual agent. And then we go through that same little exercise we went through in the listing agreement. The buyer authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, or the buyer desires exclusive representation and does not authorize dual agency. I have to get a yes or a no. And if they say yes to dual, then we can offer designated. Again, I think these listing agreements, the various things that we've talked about, different ways to expose yourself to this, I think the more you see it, the more you read it, the more you hear it, the easier it's going to get. But you can't just hear it once and expect to pass a test on dual agency. I need you guys to revisit it over and over and over again, because we keep moving. If you want to cover everything, you guys want to cover everything? Okay. So remember, you guys, I need you to go back. I need you to keep revisiting. So here's the listing agreement and the buyer's agency agreement gives us another opportunity to open our minds up to understand dual agency. I got to write somebody doing the countdown. Dual agency compensation, the firm may expect a different fee if we're acting as a dual agent. So how we expect to get paid as a dual agent is going to be spelled out here. Termination, breach, all that. Again, this isn't highlighted, but real quick, photographs and video. We talked about this with the listing agreement. When I come into your house and take a picture, picture's my property, right? That's the firm's possession. Buyers may want to, when they're going through the property, they may want to take pictures or videos. They need to understand that they're only taking pictures and videos of the space. They shouldn't be honing in on the stuff. Sometimes, again, you guys, after a while, these all run together. And if you're going out on Saturday, if you got 13 showings on Saturday with your buyer, we got to help them keep all 13 separate. Because after a while, They all run together. So encourage your buyers to take notes. Pictures if they want, video if they want, but we're with them making sure that they're not scoping the place out, that they're not trying to go back right and try to rob it later or something. So keep them focused just on the space. So listing agents, we're having conversations with our sellers about putting up personal and valuable effects. Buyers agents, we're keeping them focused on the space. Don't just open the front door and let your buyers do a free for all through the house. We all need to understand that it's still the seller's property. It's still the seller's home, and we need to respect. If the seller wants you to take shoes off, you take your shoes off because it's their house, and we ask people to do that. It's still their house. So we're going to follow their rules. There's that wire fraud warning. Can you please, I won't see this chat. Can you please send me an email? And then I got a place for the buyers, 2 buyers to sign. Again, anybody that's going to be on the deed and their spouses. We need to get everybody to sign the buyer's agency agreement. I need to make sure everybody's on board now, as opposed to finding out when we get to the closing table that they're not willing to sign. Wouldn't you rather know now before you do all that work and they say, I'm not signing this deed or signing this closing paperwork? And then here's the firm with the firm license number. And again, I'm a general agent, so I'm allowed to sign the buyer's agency agreement on behalf of my firm. I'm a general agent. I have some power. So let's see, I got a couple questions. Can the buyer say we're not going to pay and they also want that house? Well, that sounds like a lawsuit to me, doesn't it? If they say, I'm going to buy this house, but I'm not going to pay you a commission, I would get your BIC on the phone and see how your BIC, if your BIC wants you to proceed. But remember, I can't sue the buyer, can I? Because when the judge looks at our contract, the judge says, well, Miss Campbell, I see you brought a lawsuit to your buyer against the commission, but Miss Campbell, this agreement is not between you and your buyer, is it? So the judge isn't going to let you go. Everybody with me? The firm would have to sue the buyers. That's what I say. If your buyer says, I'm going to sign this, but I ain't going to pay you, get your BIC on the phone right now. 4 weeks to the exam. Yep, we're getting ready to talk about what the next 4 weeks are going to look like. You're going to send me an email. Does the form normally accept a smaller fee for dual agency since they aren't splitting with another firm's policy? Firm's policy. Every firm is different. So that's right. If the buyer says, I'm not going to pay you, maybe not proceeding isn't, but I got a written agency agreement, right? Why are you going to show property if you know you're going to get paid? They say, no, I'm not going to sign that. Then I'm asking you guys, why are you going to go out and show them 20 homes over the next 6 weeks if they're telling you from the get-go they're not paying you? Or your other option is to only show them homes where compensation is being offered. So if the for sale by owner says no, and you know your buyer's not going to pay you, don't show them that house. You guys with me? You got to protect your commission. I'm telling you guys, ain't nobody going to protect your commission but you. You've got to protect your commission. Fair enough? That for sale by owners are going to say, oh, Julie, you forgot to ask me. I'm willing to pay you X. The FSBO is not going to do that. You've got to secure it. You've got to protect it. If it's in MLS, the seller will pay you something. If it's in MLS, the seller will generally pay you something. They've contracted with a listing firm. I'm getting lots of questions about test dates, you guys. Please remember the tentative schedule is in the welcome section of Learn Test Pass. If you haven't already put our class dates in your calendar, please go to the tentative schedule and Learn Test Pass. Or if you guys look at that email from Lane, it gives you all the dates. And I don't have it off the top of my head, but all the dates for this class are in Learn Test Pass. So they have to. They have to what? Pay me? Well, I mean, I can't make anybody do anything, but if they refuse to pay me, then my firm's probably got an attorney they can call, right? Guys, this agency agreement is a legally binding contract. A legally binding contract means this will stand up in a court of law. So if they're refusing to pay you, your firm may decide to take action. Seller have to pay something when they list an MLS? They don't have to, but 99.8% of the time they do. I've never seen zero. But what if MLS does say zero? What if the seller in MLS isn't offering to pay me? Who do I call? My buyer. Two parties to the transaction. Only two people can pay me. If the seller can't or won't, who's left? Buyer. You're not going to collect commission from the closing attorney or the home inspector, right? They are not a party to the contract. I really would like you guys to spend time with these agency agreement forms. I do think it helps. Again, you got the information in your book as well. I've never had a buyer say they're not going to pay me. Can I collect from both? If the firm's policy allowed, what if I'm a dual agent and the seller agrees to pay me half and the buyer agrees to pay me half? Remember what we said very early. The parties can agree to anything. Can the parties agree to split paying my commission? Sure. Because the parties can agree to anything. Ultimately, where you collect your commission and how much you collect comes down to the firm's policy. All right, you guys get your private chat ready. I'm getting ready to put a Q&A up for you guys. Get your private chat ready. Private chat, please. Let's do this one for attendance purposes. Just guess if you don't know. I'm just looking to see if you're here. So for attendance purposes, tell me in a private chat, 1, 2, or 3, and I'll give you a hint. There might be more than one right answer. This is for attendance purposes. Guess if you don't know. Thank you for the question mark. I love those. For attendance purposes, you're telling me 1, 2, or 3. Everybody in? I like exclamation points better than question marks. Even if you're wrong, be proud of your answer. Okay. So the question says an agent must have a buyer agency agreement. An agent must have a buyer agency agreement signed when? I'm looking for 2 or 3. What do we do by first substantial contact? What's first substantial contact? You guys got it. First substantial contact is our agency disclosure. I need everybody to understand the disclosure and the agency agreement are 2 different things. The disclosure is what we do at first substantial contact. I'm disclosing my agency status. I'm allowed to work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first, but I have to reduce that oral buyer agency agreement in writing, either at the time I'm ready to present an offer for their behalf, or if I attempt to limit the buyer's ability to work with other agents. It's got to be non-exclusive. And the other thing on here is if I'm attempting for a specific period of time. What does it mean to limit the buyer's ability? I'm demanding an exclusive relationship. If I'm saying you're going to work with me and only me, I got to put that in writing because that's exclusive. Remember, under exclusive, how many firms can the buyer date? Under an exclusive relationship, the buyer can only date just one, right? So if I demand our relationship to be exclusive, I got to get it in writing. If the buyer wants to, there are buyers out there that will call 3 agents and say, this is what I'm looking for. The first one to find it wins. Go. We can all work under an oral buyer agency until one of us finds that property. We got to put it in writing. Questions on this? Disclosure and agency agreement are 2 different things. So I have everybody, disclosure and agent. Disclosure does not create agency. What creates agency are agency agreements. Disclosure is not a contract. Disclosure is disclosing my agency status. Agency agreement is creating the agency relationship. I'm begging you guys to go back to Unit 7. Remember Unit 7? We spent the better part of 2 classes on it. I'm not going to lie, you guys, I got some concern today. Some of the questions I'm getting. Please remember, please be reviewing. How many of you reviewed Agent 7? And you don't have to put your hand up. Rhetorically asking, how many of you looked at Unit 7 over the weekend? How many of you went back to the YouTube recording and you read the material and you exposed yourself to agency? If you're not raising your hand, I beg you to do so. And guys, this stuff isn't just important for your test. Do you think we need to understand agency once you get your license and you're out working with buyers and sellers? Do you think it's important to understand? I need all of you shaking your heads like, yes, Julie, really important. When working with buyers, dual agency comes up again very briefly. I think we can all agree with dual agency, there's an obvious potential for a conflict of interest. I'm serving 2 kings, aren't I? I got the seller that's a king and I got the buyer that's a king, and somehow I'm serving 2 kings. In order for both parties to agree to dual agency, we have to have informed written consent. Dual agency is intentionally created, which means I'm not going to say, we're going to do dual, sign here. That's not what informed consent means. In order to obtain that informed consent, I need to have a conversation with both parties about what it means. Remember our football analogy? The buyer's and the seller's role doesn't change. The seller's still selling, the buyer's still buying. Their roles don't change. It's my role that changes. I'm your coach until we get into dual agency, and then I become your referee. And that's what the parties need to understand. If you just start acting like a dual agent without having this informed written consent, you have engaged in what's known as undisclosed dual agency. And that's a licensed law and commission rule. We've got to have the conversation. You just can't start acting like a dual agent without their consent. As far as agency material goes, we've been through it. We're getting ready to get into the math in Unit 8. As far as agency material goes, we've been through it. Guys, we keep going though. We're going to start on the math today. When we come back on Thursday, we'll finish up with the math. We'll Kahoot. We get to Kahoot on agency on Thursday, so that'll be fun. And then we're jumping into Unit 9. So I'm begging you guys to have study time set aside. If you haven't started studying, if you haven't committed yet, as somebody just reminded us in the chat, your exam's in 4 weeks. And guys, please also remember, this is our last Tuesday, Thursday. Starting next week, we ramp it up a bit, don't we? Next week, we go into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I need you guys to have our dates from the tentative schedule in your calendar. It's in the tentative schedule. I've shown that thing to you guys twice now. I don't have time to show it again. So please look in the tentative schedule for dates class dates, test dates, and cram course. It's all in Learn, Test, Pass, the welcome section. All right. To get into the math, we once again, I need to make sure everybody's good with this. Now in Unit 8, we introduce, this is the third time we've seen this. Now that we're in Unit 8, we start introducing you to more of the proper verbiage. Does everybody see that the selling agent, the selling firm, is the one working with whom? The selling. They are working with the buyer. The listing agent and the listing firm are the ones working with the seller. So I need you guys to hear this because we're getting ready to get into commission math, introduce you guys to commission math. And you know what verbiage they're going to use? Selling agent and listing agent. So I need you guys to hear this. So I'm going to put this up. Why don't you guys take like one quick minute and jot this down. This is our commission map. So please jot this down and then we'll have a conversation about it. There's two types of math that we look at in Unit 8. Again, we'll start this today and we'll pick up wherever we leave off on Thursday. The first type of math we look at in Unit 8 is our commission math and how that commission is split. And again, this is our map. We'll talk about this in a second. The next math that we look at in Unit 8 is called seller net. We as listing agents need to help the seller figure out if you sell your house for X amount, this is how much you can collect. This is how much you'll make. Do you think that's an important question? Do you think that's something that sellers ask a lot? How much am I going to make? So we as listing agents need to be able to help them. So that's why we're going to introduce you guys to seller net here. So this is our commission map. And what this shows us is that we have our total commission as part of our sales price. And we take that total commission and we divvy it between the two sides, the listing side and the selling side. Remember, the relationship is with the firm. So who's getting paid? The firm. The split doesn't have to be 50-50. You could have, for example, 60% to the listing side, 40% to the selling side. This is all the firm's policy and all in agreement between the seller and the listing side. What we need to make sure, if it's not a 50-50 split, what we need to make sure that what the two sides is going to get is equal. There we go. The listing side plus the selling side is equal to the total commission. May that be a 50-50 split, may it not. But the two sides have got to equal the total commission. Once the side has been paid, then that side is going to split their commission between themselves and the agent. And this is what our map shows us. Usually these questions are multi-part questions, which means you're going to have to do several formulas. Usually what happens is they start with the total commission or the sales price, and then you have to figure out the side, and then you have to figure out how much the agent's going to get. So you're doing several different steps here. And this is why I like the map. Look with me, if you will, on page 242. And you can see the map in action, 242. So we start at the top there. I have a sales price of $189, total commission is 6%. So total commission paid is going to be $11,340. You guys see that? That's at the top. That's what we need to split. This particular transaction has ABC Realty and Holmes Realty each receiving 50%. So we take the total commission and divide it by 2. That tells us how much the listing side gets and how much the selling side gets. And then Holmes Realty takes their amount and they split it even further. They get 45%, the agent gets 55%. They get a percentage of the commission that the firm collects. Does everybody see that? So that's what we're doing. Those numbers, guys, anytime you see these commission problems, all these numbers are made up because remember, there is no set commission. There is no standard commission. There is no dictated commission split between you and your firm. It's all up to firm's policy. So we're just looking at examples here. When you are given the commission or the sales price, when you start at the top, let's say the problem asks you what the listing agent's going to get. So it gives you this information and asks you what the listing agent's going to get. That means we're working down the commission map, doesn't it? I start at the commission and I work my way down to how much the listing agent's going to get. When you are working down on the commission map, all the steps you take are to multiply. How do you get from here to here to here? You multiply. And yes, I have a T-bar for all of it. Never fear about that. But again, we're using this as a map to help us lay out how all that money goes. So when we're working down the map, we always multiply. What if the problem gives you the selling agent's commission and it asks for the sales price? Now we're working up, right? I'm starting with what I know, the selling agent's commission. I find the selling side and then I work up to the sales price. When you're working up the commission map, all the steps you take are going to be to divide. And that's what those arrows mean. We're going to use the map as our guide. This is in no way a formula, but these can get tricky because one, it's multi-step. We got several different calculations to make here. And two, they're awfully good with commission problems about giving you more information than what you need. So having the map help us stay focused on what we need. If a problem gives you more information than what you need, that additional information is called a distractor. And y'all know what a distractor's job is? To distract you. This is why we know the formulas. This is why we have the map, to help keep the distractions away. So use this as your guide. Let's introduce you to the toolbars, the T-bars, and then we'll pick back up here on, whenever we meet again, Thursday. So the first, I got 2 different T-bars, one for each step, okay? And every single commission problem is different. So you use the map as your guide, but typically what you're looking at, we're usually looking at total commission as part of the sales price. Total commission as part of the sales price. With this, I put an asterisk because it depends on how the problem is stated. We're going to look at a couple examples first thing on Thursday. So I'm either splitting a dollar amount or I'm splitting a percentage. And we'll look at those examples on Thursday. I got a yay for T-bars. But typically, the first thing we need to do is find, if they don't provide it to us, we need to find the total commission. From there, I mean, the problem's got to tell us if it's a 50-50 split, a 60-40 split, right? The problem has to tell us. So from there, that helps us determine the side's commission. How much is the listing side going to get? How much is the selling side going to get? And once we have the side's commission, then we figure out how much the firm or the agent gets. So I got a different T-bar now. I first got to figure out the side, and then I got to figure out the firm or the agent split. How much of the firm's commission is the agent going to collect? Again, you guys, please understand, these are very basic T-bars because every single commission problem is different. So I can't give you a T-bar for every, but the more of these you do for practice, what do we know about math? We're gonna practice, practice, practice. So the more you guys can practice on these, you're gonna be exposed to the different ways that these problems can be stated. So the T-bars are helpful, yes. They tell me, you know, where everything goes, but it all goes back to the map. And sometimes I've had students actually map it out because they can see where that commission is going. Each step may require a new T-bar, and that's what we're saying here. So this is where we're going to finish today. Please don't go anywhere just yet. When we come back on Thursday, we're going to look at some practice problems together with commission math. Then we need to talk about SellerNet. I really encourage you guys, if you're not committed, to please get committed. 4 weeks will be here whether you're ready or not. So please, if I don't have you on board yet, please get on board. We still got a lot to cover, guys. We're not even halfway through the material yet. So we still got a lot to cover. I need you guys going back, review unit 3, review unit 7 4 times, right? I need you guys to keep going back so you can retain that information. But we also got to keep moving forward. So we'll finish unit 8. We'll Kahoot on unit 7 and 8. That's our agency Kahoot. And then we'll get into 9. We blow through unit 9 pretty quickly. I'll go ahead and tell you guys the key to unit 9 is terms. That's what unit 9 is all about, is understanding terms and the vocabulary. If you don't get started on unit 10 on Thursday, we should be able to finish 8, get through 9, and start on 10. So please look ahead. 1 o'clock. You guys have a good day, and I'll see everybody ready to go and ready to focus, please, on Thursday.